Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere oddly extravagant, slightly ridiculous, and thoroughly soothing, the pineapple-obsessed salons of 18th century France. You're gliding quietly down the polished marble corridors of Versailles. Your velvet slippers barely whisper as you pass oil lamps flickering against gold-flecked wallpaper. The scent of beeswax and rosewater hangs thick in the air. Ahead in a dining hall so grand it would make your neighborhood museum weep, a cluster of powdered nobles stand in absolute reverent silence. They're staring at something. You ease forward through the satin sleeves and clinking fans. And there it is, on a mirrored pedestal, resting atop a bed of imported lace, is the strangest looking fruit you've ever seen. Its spiky skin gleams under the chandeliers. It looks like a medieval weapon crossed with a tropical lantern. It's a pineapple, and everyone here is obsessed with it. You glance around mildly concerned. Someone is fanning themselves dramatically. Another clutches their cravat as though having a religious experience. A third begins weeping, yes, actually crying, at the sheer majesté de l'ananas. You're pretty sure you wouldn't survive this century. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these sleepy stories travel. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're here as a junior courtier technically attached to the Duke de something or other's retinue. Realistically, you mostly fetch things beau at the right moments and try not to spill sauce on the tapestries. But tonight is different. Tonight you are present for one of the most anticipated culinary unveilings in recent memory, the reveal of a pineapple grown in the royal orangery itself. You sidle up to another courtier who's nearly fainting with anticipation. He whispers, "It took 3 years to grow this one." 3 years. Can you believe it? You can't, and you don't. But you nod solemnly because here in Versailles, belief is less important than performance. The pineapple glory is spiny and slightly overripe is not to be eaten. No one dares. It's too precious. Instead, it's simply admired, toured from room to room on a gilded cart like a visiting dignitary. You think you hear someone referring to it as Monsieur Ananas. One mainstream fact: pineapples were indeed grown in European greenhouses as early as the 17th century, but it was the 18th century when they truly became a symbol of elite French luxury. They were grown with incredible care in heated glass structures called pineries, which cost a small fortune to build and maintain. One quirky detail: it was common for the same pineapple to be rented out to different hosts across several weeks. Guests rarely ate them, just stared, gossiped, and posed for portraits with them. Think of it as the 1700s version of Instagramming a Michelin star meal you have no intention of finishing. Historians still argue whether the pineapple craze in France was genuinely about the fruit's taste, or whether it was merely the latest in a long line of aristocratic status symbols, a gold-trimmed cabbage, so to speak. Some suggest it was the perfect metaphor for French nobility at the time, exotic, expensive, and wildly impractical. Your host, the Marquise de la Pomme, yet really glides over in her chartreuse silk gown. Do you not feel its aura? She breathes, placing a gloved hand lightly on the pineapple's crown. One can almost hear the sea. You can't, but you nod anyway. You are excellent at nodding. As the evening drifts along, the pineapple is slowly moved closer to the main table. You observe a footman holding it like an infant, while 2 others spread fresh doilies beneath it. You're nearly hypnotized by the slow, ceremonial rhythm of it all. Wine is poured. Lutes are plucked. A woman recites an ode in rhymed couplets to the nobility of fruits that travel. You briefly fall asleep, standing up. Later, as the crowd filters out, the pineapple is carefully stored away in a velvet-lined box and escorted by guards to a secure chamber. Not a single bite has been taken. You trail after the dwindling guests, half dreaming the scent of tropical sugar and candle wax clinging to your embroidered coat. Outside, the stars have come out, and someone somewhere is already writing a poem titled Ode to the Pineapple of Versailles. You make your way back to your quarters, reflecting on the undeniable power of a fruit that manages to cause gasps, tears, poetry, and high-level diplomatic dinner invitations, all without being peeled. As you finally sink onto your 2-stuffed mattress, you think the pineapple had a better evening than most nobles here. You wake to a faint knock. 3 polite raps on the carved oak of your chamber door. It's barely dawn, and your chamber pot is still warm, but duty calls. A valet slips inside with yesterday's leftover gossip and a plate of undercooked pheasant. The pineapple, he says in a breathless hush, has been moved to the salon. Naturally, you follow. The sun has barely begun to warm the marble floors, and yet already the palace is alive with hushed murmurs and fluttering fans. Everyone is preparing for the second showing. Nobles do not gather around pineapples only once. Oh no, this is a multi-day event. As you make your way to the grand salon, you ponder how the pineapple even got here in the first place. You remember your tutor's lecture delivered while he gnawed on licorice and adjusted his wig every 6 seconds. One mainstream fact: pineapples are native to South America and were introduced to Europe in the late 15th century following Columbus's return from the Caribbean. The fruit quickly became a symbol of the exotic and unattainable, a literal taste of paradise. Quaint as that sounds, the first European attempts to grow pineapples were, in a word, hilarious. The climate, all wrong. The soil, terribly confused. The gardeners, more accustomed to tulips than tropical fruit. For decades, European courts relied entirely on imported pineapples, costly bruised by sea travel and prone to spoiling mid-voyage, which is probably why the sight of one sitting there in the salon, perfectly golden, with not a speck of mold, inspires near holy reverence. Now comes the twist. France didn't want to keep importing pineapples forever. That simply wouldn't do. The idea of relying on Dutch shipments? How uncouth. And thus began the great pineapple experiment. You're shepherded over to an elderly gentleman with wild eyebrows and a voice like melted butter. He's introducing a painting of a pinery, a pineapple greenhouse. This, he explains, is where the future lies. You squint at the canvas. It's a long, low building, its glass roof angled to catch the sun. Inside are rows upon rows of pineapples, each wrapped in a little coat. You blink again. Yes, those are fruit in cloaks. Wool, the man says proudly, keeps them warm. One quirky detail: pineapple plants in early French greenhouses were often individually bundled in wool and bedded in horse manure, yes, really for warmth. The fruit was cold-sensitive demanding, and not the least bit grateful. Historians still argue whether these early pineries were driven by botanical curiosity or competitive snobbery. Some insist they were the result of Enlightenment-era scientific zeal, while others think it was just another aristocratic arms race, but with spiky fruit. You're invited to view the newest addition to the palace's own pineapple operation. It's a short walk through misty gardens where statues of Greek gods peer down at you, like they know how silly this all is. The orangery, once dedicated to citrus, is now moonlighting as a pineapple nursery. Rows of potted plants stretch before you, like little soldiers. Each one is monitored by a sweating gardener, with a thermometer and a paranoid look. There's the scent of damp soil manure, and is that cinnamon? Someone you suspect is experimenting. The head gardener is introduced. He's a small man with enormous hands and a hatred for talking. You watch him grunt and nod as courtiers flit around, pretending to understand soil acidity and phototropism. You overhear one noblewoman ask if playing harpsichord music improves the fruit's shape. You flee before hearing the answer. Back in the salon, the original pineapple now sits atop a rotating stand. Someone has composed a minuet in its honor. A flutist performs while an audience watches rapt. You take your seat, eyes drifting closed as the music wraps around you like silk. You've learned something today. This fruit, once bruised and nearly rotted in a ship's hull, is now the toast of Versailles. Not because of its flavor, few here have tasted it, but because it is rare, difficult, exotic, and nothing makes a French noble swoon like difficulty wrapped in gold. As the flutist trills her final note, someone claps too enthusiastically. It's your cue to disappear before being recruited into yet another fruit-related performance. You slip out of the salon and into the cooler hallways, the scent of warm pineapple trailing faintly behind. You make your way back to the kitchens where last night's scullions are still scrubbing saucepans and cursing under their breath. You sit on a stool, rubbing your aching feet, and wonder what it would actually taste like, this fruit you've now spent 2 full days orbiting. Would it be sweet, acidic worth the years of waiting and the mountain of wool? The head cook leans over, whispering conspiratorially, "I once licked the rind. It's fine." And with that revolutionary knowledge, you nod off the din of the kitchen, lulling you like a lullaby of copper pots and coconut rumors. You're jolted awake by the soft but unmistakable sound of a powdered wig being adjusted too aggressively nearby. A footman is standing over you with that practiced look of calm panic, reserved for people who work under nobles. "They need you," he whispers in the glass wing. You blink. The what now? The glass wing, as it turns out, is the newly constructed stretch of Versailles dedicated to exotic fruit containment, specifically pineapples. You're not entirely sure if this is a joke or if someone actually drew up architectural plans around a single produce category. But here you are. Following a zigzagging hallway past velvet curtains, you arrive at a warm, foggy corridor lined with potted pineapples, gas lamps, and confused turtles. One mainstream fact: the design of pineries, those specialized glass structures built to house pineapples, was a feat of horticultural vanity. France, England, and the Netherlands all developed increasingly complex greenhouse systems, using angled glass, underground heating systems, and south-facing slopes to trap solar heat. Versailles' own glass wing was fictional, but rooted in the spirit of absurd architectural extravagance. The head gardener stands waiting. "You're just in time," he grunts, gesturing to a particularly smug-looking pineapple. "She's ready to meet the Duke." Wait, One quirky detail. It was not uncommon for noble gardeners or hosts to give pineapples names, personalities, or even astrological charts. One documented pineapple in an English greenhouse was referred to as Lady Pricklenose, and reportedly had her own watering schedule pinned to the staff wall. You kneel down next to the pot, unsure if you're meant to curtsy. The fruit gives nothing away. "She's going out on display again tonight," the gardener continues. "So we're buffing the spikes." He hands you a cloth and a small bottle labeled Essence de Citron. You blink. You're about to give a fruit a spa treatment. As you rub each individual scale in slow, methodical circles, you can't help but wonder, when did we all agree this was normal? "Don't miss the crown," the gardener says. That's where the nobility fixate. Historians still argue whether the obsession with pineapples was a sincere reverence for tropical beauty or a bizarre exercise in symbolic consumption. Some scholars suggest the fruit stood in for everything Europe wanted to control: nature, empire, and exoticism, all neatly arranged on a crystal pedestal. You're summoned from your polishing duties to accompany the pineapple on its route to the portrait chamber. A team of artists is preparing to sketch it for the Duke's winter invitations. Yes, the fruit will be the centerpiece of the official Versailles holiday card. A footman carries it in his arms like a newborn. The two of you follow at a respectful distance, trying not to breathe too loudly in the fruit's presence. Inside the portrait chamber, you find 6 artists already arguing over the lighting. Too harsh. Not tropical enough, it needs mystery. They arrange it atop a cushion. Someone fans it with a feather plume. A third attempts to catch its good side. You lean against a pillar and try not to fall asleep. But the painter's arguments are oddly soothing. You hear one say, "We must honor its journey." And what a journey it's had. You picture the long weeks it spent being coaxed to life under glass, and manure the daily whispered encouragements, the gloved hands trimming its leaves just so. You imagine its transport through royal corridors past curious courtiers and jealous fruit enthusiasts. You consider the absurdity of it all, this single piece of produce now poised to become immortalized in pastel. At some point, you doze off briefly against the velvet-lined wall. You dream of pineapples and opera wigs singing in falsetto. You're shaken awake by a page boy with an urgent message. You're needed for the tasting. Wait, the what now? Turns out an older pineapple, slightly soft, tragically out of its prime, is finally being retired from public service. It will be eaten. You're to help escort the fruit to the tasting room, and then stand by. The fruit is wheeled in on a small gold cart surrounded by more security than the crown jewels. Guests are already seated in anticipation. A hush falls over the room as a silver knife slices through its flesh with a sound not unlike applause. You stand at the back, heart pounding. Will it taste like victory, like sunshine, like betrayal? You are offered a sliver. You chew. It's fine. Sweet, slightly sour. Honestly, not that different from the pineapples hawked by sleepy market vendors on the edge of town. There's a quiet collective shrug in the air. Nobody dares say it, but you all feel it. That was a whole lot of pageantry for what is in the end just a fruit. And yet, when a noblewoman lifts her glass and toasts to the queen of fruits, everyone claps anyway. Because in Versailles, sometimes it doesn't matter how something tastes. It matters how it's dressed, who carries it, how many candles surround it, and whether it appears in this year's tapestry. You excuse yourself and wander back to the glass wing, where the new pineapples sleep under moonlight and mist. You think of Lady Pricklenose, of buffing spikes and portrait debates, and of all the people who never tasted the fruit they worshipped. You lean against a warm patch of glass eyes fluttering shut. Somewhere nearby, a gardener whispers to a pineapple, "Sleep well, my golden darling." You do. The next morning begins with a scandal. Not a major one, not the kind involving mistresses or duels, but a slow-burning, hushed whispers kind of crisis. Someone moved the pineapple. Specifically, someone rotated it ever so slightly to the left. And now the crown doesn't catch the morning light just right. The effect apparently is devastating. You arrive to find three nobles huddled around the pedestal, debating whether the pineapple looks more sullen than it did yesterday. One of them, wearing a waistcoat embroidered with lemons, ironic, really declares that the entire salon's harmony has been thrown off. You offer to help, which is a mistake. Within moments, you're tasked with repositioning the pineapple. A woman fans herself dramatically, more to the east. No, your east. Another begins quoting Horace for some reason. The pressure mounts. You adjust it 2 millimeters clockwise. Gasps, then silence, then applause. You bow deeply and retreat before someone asks you to center the fruit's aura. One mainstream fact. In 18th century Europe, pineapples became so symbolic of status that they were used not just as food, but as table centerpieces, architectural ornaments, and even patterns on clothing and wallpaper. It was not uncommon to design entire dinner tables around the dramatic reveal of a single fruit. You decide to escape the chaos by heading to the archives, one of Versailles' quieter wings, where the dust motes swirl like sleepy bees, and the furniture hasn't moved since the last monarch sneezed. You're researching a peculiar question that's been itching at the back of your mind. How did the pineapple arrive in such pristine condition? A sleepy scribe named Gerard brings you a stack of leather-bound logs. You flip through elegant calligraphy detailing trade routes, storage temperatures, and fruit-handling gloves. Yes, gloves. Apparently, some pineapples were considered too noble to be touched by bare hands. And here's where it gets even stranger. One quirky detail. For pineapples grown abroad and shipped to France, there were entire ships referred to, colloquially, as floating hothouses. They were equipped with special canopies, layers of hay for insulation, and occasionally a designated sailor, whose only job was to check for bruising. Historians still argue whether these floating fruit missions were genuine logistical necessities or elaborate performances staged to satisfy noble vanity. Some claim the efforts to maintain the pineapple's presentation during transport were more complex than those used for human passengers. You close the logbook with a soft thump. Somewhere in the margins, a bored archivist has doodled a tiny pineapple with angry eyebrows. You take that as a sign to go. Outside, the palace gardens are soaked in golden afternoon light. The fountains gurgle like sleepy dragons, and the distant hum of lutes wafts from the music chamber. It's almost peaceful until a page boy sprints past, shrieking, "The Marquise has commissioned pineapple shoes. Someone stop her." You decide not to follow. Instead, you find yourself wandering toward the lesser courtyards where the junior staff gather. Here, away from the powdered politics and fruit worship, things move slower. A few scullery maids are peeling potatoes. A valet is asleep upright on a barrel. You sit beside an undergardener who offers you half a plum and a tired smile. "She's beautiful," he says dreamily, staring at the pineapple through the kitchen window. You nod. "She's complicated." He chuckles. "She's exhausting." Together, you watch a pair of footmen carry her back into the salon for another public appearance. Someone's planning a pineapple-themed poetry reading. You do not envy them. By twilight, you're back inside, dodging trays of marzipan and leaning quietly against a tapestry that smells faintly of lavender and ambition. A small ensemble begins tuning instruments for the evening's entertainment, a pineapple masquerade. Everyone's dressed like fruit. You're not kidding. The Duke is dressed as a banana. The Marquise is resplendent in an orange bodice with appliqued seeds. Someone's wearing a hat shaped like a durian, which you feel is a hostile choice. You're in standard servant wear, but someone has clipped a tiny pineapple charm to your sleeve. You wear it like a medal of honor. The pineapple sits center stage on a throne of silk surrounded by candles. A court poet stands beside it, clearing his throat. He launches into a sonnet so full of tropical metaphors and botanical innuendo that you lose track around stanza 7. You lean your head against the wall and let the rhyme scheme wash over you. It's all a bit much, but in a slow, strangely hypnotic way. You don't feel the minutes pass. You only feel the soft flicker of candlelight and the distant scent of warm sugar and spiced wine. Tonight, the pineapple won't be eaten. She's just here to listen. You understand now, maybe. This isn't about taste. It's about spectacle, about longing for somewhere warmer, stranger, more fragrant than the marble corridors of Versailles. The pineapple is less fruit and more dream. And dreams, after all, are best served whole. Morning again, and you wake to the rhythmic thunk of something being chopped. Not the usual kitchen cacophony. No, this is slower, more deliberate. You shuffle out of your narrow bed wig, slightly askew, and follow the sound to the side garden, where a small crowd has gathered around a wooden chopping block. Your stomach tightens. It's a pineapple. Not the pineapple, mind you. This one is a lesser specimen, slightly lopsided, faintly green, and deemed unfit for decorative duty. The gardener stands beside it, holding a large knife, like he's conducting a fruit tribunal. Any final words he jokes, receiving only sleepy groans in return. One swift chop, and the crown is removed. The fruit is sliced vertically with a satisfying squelch. A valet sniffs, recoils, and mutters, "Underripe, a tragedy." One mainstream fact: while pineapples are now commonplace in 18th century France, they were so rare and expensive that their fate, whether to be eaten, displayed, gifted, or destroyed, was a matter of genuine discussion. Sometimes fruit deemed too imperfect for show was used for flavoring cordials, infused oils, or medicinal concoctions. And so begins your newest assignment. You are now apprenticed temporarily to the royal apothecary. Why? Because the Marquise has requested a pineapple tonic for general glowiness, and you, as someone with proven pineapple adjacency, are considered qualified. The apothecary's chambers are tucked away behind the herb gardens, where chamomile and mint brush your ankles and sleepy bees hum through the air like tiny fuzzy harps. The man himself is part pharmacist, part alchemist, part compulsive collector. His shelves are packed with glass vials, crumbling manuscripts, and a stuffed squirrel wearing spectacles. You try not to ask. Your task is to grind the pineapple rind into a fine paste, mix it with rose water, and infuse it with crushed pearls and something labeled Essence of Philosophical Optimism. You don't ask what that last one is either. One quirky detail: some noble apothecaries in 18th century Europe created fruit elixirs believed to improve mood, skin tone, or even intelligence. Pineapple, with its exotic nature and bright acidity, was said to balance the humors and lighten melancholia, particularly when mixed with silver flakes. As you stir the concoction clockwise for energetic alignment, you're told the apothecary leans in. "This isn't really medicine," he whispers. "But it feels like medicine. That's what they're paying for." Historians still argue whether the medicinal use of rare fruits like pineapple had any practical effect, or was more akin to theatrical placebo. Some claim the elaborate preparation rituals offered psychological comfort more potent than the tonics themselves. Once the potion is decanted into a cobalt blue vial and sealed with wax, you're sent scurrying off to deliver it. The Marquise is lounging on a fainting couch in her second favorite conservatory, attended by two small dogs and one large man in a feathered hat, who might be a poet or just lost. She accepts the vial with dramatic flair, sniffs it, and exclaims, "I feel healthier already." You are dismissed with a wave and a suggestion that your aura seems more balanced. You choose to take that as a compliment. On your way out, you pass another courtier inquiring whether pineapples can be ground into face powder. The apothecary does not say no. You retreat to the shade of the orchard, where you finally sit down beside a quiet fountain and listen to the lazy burble of water and the distant strum of a harp. For a moment, the palace feels almost sane. Then a messenger appears. He's out of breath, slightly sweaty, and clutching a folded parchment. You, he wheezes, are invited to a private demonstration. You blink. Of what? He just hands you the scroll and stumbles off. It's sealed with wax and stamped with the emblem of the Compagnie des Ananas. You didn't know such a company existed, but of course it does. You arrive at a small chamber near the map room, where a few elite guests are seated around what looks like a polished wooden crate. A man in a green suit is already mid-speech. And with this device, we shall revolutionize pineapple storage. The lid is lifted. Gasps. Inside is a highly polished wooden box lined with satin and filled with tiny compartments, each shaped like a pineapple. He explains that it maintains tropical humidity using a mix of moss mirrors and warm stones. One noble claps, slowly muttering, "This changes everything." You're not sure what everything entails, but the murmurs around the room are giddy. You slip out before someone appoints you pineapple storage assistant. Outside, Dusk is settling over the gardens. Lanterns are being lit, and the first notes of another evening quartet float into the air. You wander past the reflecting pool, where a duck appears to bow as you pass. You pause under an ivy-wrapped arch and close your eyes. Today you've crushed a fruit into face cream, watched a melon be executed, and witnessed a sales pitch for what amounts to a pineapple coffin. And somehow it's all been oddly restful. You sit on a stone bench and let the scent of lavender and sugar carry you away. Somewhere a nobleman is writing a sonnet to a salad. Somewhere a pineapple is being gently rotated under moonlight. You doze with a faint smile on your face, dreaming of satiny boxes and philosophical optimism. You awake not to the sound of bells or birdsong, but of lace, specifically the rustling of heavily starched lace, which could only mean one thing: a noblewoman is approaching at full ceremonial speed. You blink groggily as the Comtesse de Bellepine rounds the hedge, trailed by 2 footmen, and what appears to be a taxidermied parrot on a leash. Her eyes lock onto you with dramatic purpose. "There you are," she says. "We're rehearsing for the presentation ritual. The pineapple needs a handler." You have many questions, but none that feel safe to ask. And so, a quarter hour later, you find yourself in the Hall of Decorative Ethics, yes. It's real, wearing white gloves and holding a satin pillow. Upon that pillow rests a moderately famous pineapple, once featured in the tapestry, Still Life with Empire and Very Large Fruit. You're not alone. 10 other handlers stand in a semicircle, each bearing something ornamental: a porcelain duck, a bust of Aristotle, a single silver spoon. The Comtesse claps her hands, again with more awe. You lift your pillow as if it bears the crown of Charlemagne. The pineapple wobbles slightly. One mainstream fact: French court life in the 18th century involved endless rituals, both meaningful and meaningless. Objects, especially exotic or rare ones, were often integrated into these rituals as symbolic tokens of power, wealth, or supposed divine favor. The more ornate and bizarre, the better. Today's ceremony is being crafted for the Duke of Anjou's upcoming name day. The idea is to present the pineapple as a symbol of worldly achievement and colonial abundance, right between the reading of a poem and the releasing of 400 doves. One quirky detail: there are actual records of fruit, especially pineapples, being included in diplomatic gift exchanges and ceremonial court appearances, sometimes paired with a poem or minuet composed in the fruit's honor. You rehearse the procession of glory 4 times before the Comtesse decides the pineapple's angle is philosophically unsound. You're not sure what that means, but someone brings in a spirit level. Eventually, the pineapple is returned to its cooling box, and you are dismissed with a piece of honey cake and a compliment on your elegant grip. You head back through the West Wing ears, still ringing with harpsichord and poetic recitations. At this point, you've formed a sort of friendship with the kitchen staff. Tonight they were in the middle of preparing a pineapple-forward dessert tableau. You offer to help. A scullery maid hands you a tray of candied peels, still steaming from the pot. One footman snorts. "Bet they won't even eat it. Last week's duck was just for looking." And that's true. One of the lesser-known facts of Versailles life is that not everything served was ever meant to be consumed. Elaborate dishes, including some involving pineapples, were assembled for appearance, then quietly whisked away before anyone dug in. They were culinary theater. You help pipe whipped cream into a small pastry tower shaped like a pineapple. It sags slightly. No one seems bothered. The head chef leans over and whispers, "They just want it to look like Versailles tastes good." Historians still argue whether the aesthetic madness of 18th century dining was truly about indulgence or a form of soft diplomacy. Some suggest the artistry of the meal itself was a way of displaying national superiority. Look, how beautiful our waste is. Later that evening, the dessert tableau is unveiled. It glistens like a sugar-coated mirage. A pineapple made of spun sugar dominates the center, flanked by creme-filled pastry swans and a pyramid of glazed figs. Nobles circle it, cooing. One draws a sketch. Another writes a haiku on the spot. You retreat to a corner of the room, nibbling a crumb from a discarded tart shell, and watch the surreal performance unfold. At one point, someone tries to kiss the sugar pineapple. They're gently removed. You slip outside for air. The gardens are quiet now, dotted with lanterns and long shadows. You find your usual bench, settle in, and lean your head back to look at the stars. Somewhere in the palace, the real pineapple, the one you buffed and carried, rests beneath a linen shroud waiting for its next ritual. It's strange, you think. All this for a fruit that most people have never tasted fresh. That many believe is sweeter than it really is. That has become more symbol than substance. But that's Versailles. Here everything is theater, even produce. You close your eyes lulled by the distant echo of minuet music and the gentle chirp of frogs near the reflecting pool. You dream of pineapples with titles of candied crowns of parades in fruit's honor. You dream of lace rustling through gilded halls and a comtesse declaring with utter conviction, that pineapple has presence. You wake to the soft, familiar rustle of silk and whispered arguments echoing down the gallery. Someone is late to a poetry brunch. Someone else has misplaced their ceremonial wig. You meanwhile have received a handwritten note sealed with wax and folded into the shape of what else? A pineapple. Inside, an invitation. Your presence is humbly required for the pineapple lecture hosted by the Marquis de Plinthe. Attendance is compulsory, hats encouraged. Your head is already hurting. You make your way to the philosopher's wing, a quieter, less trafficked section of the palace, where men with thin spectacles and thick egos enjoy hearing themselves speak. The room is arranged like a miniature theater. Velvet cushions, gilt armrests, and a faint smell of old parchment fill the air. At the front stands the Marquis, a wiry man with the posture of a heron and the voice of someone who once drank too much ink. Today, he begins, we ponder not the pineapple's taste, but its meaning. Oh dear, one mainstream fact. The pineapple was often interpreted not just as an exotic fruit, but as a metaphor. In Enlightenment circles, it symbolized the New World's promise, the height of cultivation, and even the perfection of nature, tamed, ordered, and ripening on cue. The Marquis gestures to a series of paintings, pineapples in still lifes, pineapples in the arms of saints, pineapples juxtaposed with globes, scrolls, and sailing ships. He refers to the fruit as an emblem of curiosity and conquest. You nod along. Everyone is nodding. No one dares look confused. One quirky detail. In certain philosophical texts of the era, the pineapple was described as a crown-bearing fruit, a natural monarch whose symmetry and rarity made it a mirror of enlightened rule. It was even used in architectural motifs carved into stair railings and fountains symbolizing prosperity and prestige. Then comes the debate. A young noble with the hairstyle of a dandelion poses a question. If the pineapple represents enlightenment, what does it reject? The room hums with interest. Someone murmurs, ignorance. Someone else whispers, grapes. Historians still argue whether these intellectual salons were genuine exercises in thought or just another layer of aristocratic performance. Some suggest they were platforms for flexing education, not unlike quoting Latin at dinner to impress your guests even if the grammar's a bit off. The Marquis offers his final thesis. In growing a pineapple, we assert dominion over chaos. We crystallize the tropics into a European form. There's polite applause and a flurry of powdered heads bow slightly toward the fruit. On display, a plump polished specimen encased in a glass dome. You escape as soon as decorum allows and head toward the quieter parts of the garden where things grow a little more haphazardly. Wild roses tangle with mint and thyme. You spot a gardener planting something definitely not pineapple, and you breathe a little easier. As you stroll past the reflecting pool, a court musician ambles by humming a pineapple-inspired composition titled Elegy in Gold and Green. You don't ask to hear it. Back inside, a new event is being whispered about the exotic pairing. Rumor has it that a nobleman from Spain has brought, brace yourself, a mango. He's planning a fruit summit in the Rose Salon, where select guests will be invited to compare the two. You're not on the list, yet, but the kitchen staff always knows things before the nobility does. So, you make a small trade, 2 candied violets and a palm-sized potato in exchange for a seat near the folding doors. You arrive just in time. The mango is revealed gently unwrapped from a silk scarf. The room gasps. It's slightly overripe, faintly speckled, but undeniably fragrant. Someone faints. A valet fans her with a menu. The pineapple sits on the opposite table, glowing like a smug sun. The nobleman clears his throat. One fruit is power, he says. The other, seduction. People love this. You lean in to catch the murmurings. The mango is tender, but the pineapple commands. Yes, yes, but which would you carve into a cathedral? One guest suggests blending the two. He is gently asked to leave. You observe the silent rivalry between the fruits. The mango has mystery. The pineapple has authority. Together, they represent the full spectrum of 18th century French overthinking. You're offered a slice of mango on a silver toothpick. You accept. It's floral soft, unexpectedly intimate. A quiet rebellion next to the pineapple's prickly throne. Later, You find yourself back near the kitchens, where the pastry chef is furiously sketching plans for a tart that will include both fruits and three conflicting metaphors. You nod in support, then sneak an almond from a nearby tray. As twilight paints the gardens in hues of honey and lilac, you wander back to the reflecting pool. The comtesse passes you sipping a cordial and mutters, "Between us, I think the mango had more poise." You say nothing, because here even your fruit opinions are political. You sit again on your usual bench, the day's oddities swirling like soft shadows behind your eyes. Philosophers, pastries, and fruity pageants, all centered around something that, at its core, just wants to be eaten. You lean back, a breeze stirs your coat, a lantern flickers, and somewhere inside the palace, the marquis is still talking. The next morning, your dreams still smell faintly of mango and court perfume. You're aroused not by a summons or scandal, but by an actual pineapple, sort of. It's a letter, shaped like one anyway, folded into the tight form of a pineapple with absurdly precise creases. It's scented with something sweet and waxy. You unfold it carefully, half expecting it to bite. The Duchess of Orléans requests your presence at the Society of Gentle Fruit. Of course she does. You make your way through Versailles' East Wing, a lesser-known stretch reserved for quiet pursuits, embroidery tea readings, and philosophical stargazing. The salon of the society is tucked behind a library full of unread botanical texts. You push open the double doors and step into a world made entirely of fruit. Literally. The walls are papered in a pineapple motif. Pineapple candles flicker on delicate end tables. Pineapple-shaped sconces glow faintly. And the centerpiece, oh, naturally, is a pineapple resting in a crystal bowl filled with powdered sugar and gold foil. One mainstream fact: pineapples were often used in interior design motifs during the 18th century, not only in France but throughout Europe. They symbolized welcome abundance and refined taste. In Versailles, their visual presence spread well beyond the dining room to textiles, ceramics, and even architecture. You're welcomed by the Duchess herself, a woman of precise speech and approximately 900 hairpins. You've been selected, she says, for the initiation tasting. You don't know what that means, but it sounds vaguely edible and mildly alarming. You're handed a glass of champagne. A server offers you a pineapple-studded canapé that tastes like sweet bread and sea air. Someone in a tangerine waistcoat claps their hands. Let the ritual begin. And it's surprisingly tame. You're seated in a circle of embroidered chairs. A poem is recited in reverence of the pineapple's inner glow. A harpsichord plays something dreamy in the background. Everyone's expression hovers somewhere between bliss and gentle confusion. One quirky detail: some noble societies actually hosted semi-secret fruit salons where rare or exotic fruits were not only tasted, but discussed, symbolized, and ranked in an elaborate social hierarchy. A pineapple might outrank a papaya, but fall short of a perfectly ripe fig. After the poem, a woman named Victoire presents a miniature tapestry. She's been weaving a pineapple with rays of sunlight shooting from its crown. You hear murmurs of approval, though one nobleman whispers, "The rind is a bit too forward." Historians still argue whether these societies were serious cultural forums or simply fashionable distractions for the idle rich. Likely both. Some claim they served as a stage for soft diplomacy, where fruit acted as a stand-in for colonial commentary no one dared express directly. Next up is the silent segment. You're instructed to sit quietly and contemplate the pineapple's presence. 1 minute passes, then 2. You nearly fall asleep. A soft chime signals the end of the ritual, and you are now officially a gentle fruit fellow. The Duchess pins a tiny pineapple brooch to your lapel and declares, "You are welcome among the fragrant." You're offered a final slice of candied pineapple, so sweet it makes your teeth hum. You eat it slowly, savoring the moment, and try not to think about the fact that you've spent most of your month being emotionally manipulated by fruit. As you step back into the corridor, a servant intercepts you with an urgent request. The court painter wants to borrow your likeness for a fresco involving fruit allegory. You protest weakly, but are pulled toward the studio regardless. You arrive to find an enormous half-finished mural, a surreal, dreamlike tableau featuring pineapples floating in a celestial sea. At the center, a noble riding one like a horse. You glance at the painter who's already sketching your cheekbones. "I see in you the spirit of tropical melancholy," he says. You're too tired to argue. 1 foot in fantasy, 1 in fatigue, you sit for the portrait. You're given a prop, a papier-mâché pineapple on a stick. You hold it upright as instructed and try not to blink too much. The artist murmurs phrases like glorious ripeness and existential juice as he works. You start to wonder if you're still asleep. Later, once dismissed, you wander to the fountain terrace to clear your mind. The water ripples gently. Two ducks paddle past. A nobleman strolls by in full court dress and casually drops a peeled banana into the basin. No one reacts. You sit on the sun-warmed stone edge and breathe deeply. Your pockets smell faintly of syrup and starch. Your shirt still bears the sticky shadow of candied fruit. You think about the society of gentle fruit, the silent segment, and your brief, bizarre moment of portrait fame. You start to laugh, quietly, sleepily, and then unexpectedly you feel calm. Not because anything made sense, but because everything was exactly as ridiculous as it promised to be. You close your eyes. Somewhere in the palace, someone is composing a limerick about a coconut. Someone else is crafting a tiny fruit crown for a mouse. You feel the faint breeze of a fan and the slow, luxurious weight of impending sleep. And in your dream, the pineapple smiles. You wake to the smell of something slightly burnt and extremely expensive. Toasted almonds? No. Roasted sugar? Closer. A quick glance outside your tiny chamber window reveals a plume of smoke rising from the far side of the palace. You sigh. It's probably just another pineapple-shaped firework demonstration gone awry. Still, you go investigate. By the time you reach the western courtyard, the chaos has calmed. A sugar sculpture in the shape of a pineapple, a centerpiece meant for the upcoming royal banquet, has collapsed in a dramatic syrupy heap. The chef is inconsolable. The courtiers are delighted. It melted so poetically, someone says. You do not laugh. You do, however, sneak a burnt sugar shard when no one's looking. As you wander away from the sticky aftermath, a familiar voice calls out to you. It's the Marquise de la Pomme today, dressed like a bowl of fruit salad, floral embroidery, citrus-hued shoes, and what appears to be a melon slice dangling from her choker. Come, she says, you must help me plan my pineapple soiree. Of course. You trail behind her, past perfumed corridors, and pastiche portraits of long-forgotten ancestors. Her salon is decked in golden ribbons, and what can only be described as fruit-themed taxidermy. A squirrel wearing a papaya skirt stares at you as you enter. One mainstream fact: themed soirées were a common affair in 18th century aristocratic circles, and pineapples, being rare and visually striking, were often used as unifying symbols of refinement, luxury, and worldly sophistication. From dinnerware to dancing to decor, no detail was left unpineappled. You're put in charge of the guest list. Oh, no diplomats, she says. They always talk about trade agreements and ruin the mystique. Instead, she wants poets, gardeners, anyone who has loved a fruit deeply and without shame. You write down names as she rattles them off. Victoire, of course. And Jean-Louis, he weeps when peeling citrus. That's dedication. She then requests a centerpiece so opulent it causes envy, but not so opulent it causes duels. This is apparently a delicate balance. One quirky detail. There is record of at least one noble duel in the 1770s instigated over a disputed fruit arrangement. A count accused a viscount of mimicking his signature pineapple mango spiral at a rival's banquet. Pistols were drawn, no fruit was harmed. As you help oversee the arrangements, you begin to understand the strange machinery of Versailles' social currency. Fruit here is not just food, it's flirtation competition metaphor. It's how one noble out-sophisticates another without uttering a single word. The guest favors include pineapple-shaped fans, small jars of pineapple jam imported from Martinique, and a scented handkerchief embroidered with a quote from Rousseau: "To savor is to reign." Historians still argue whether these events were mere decadence or expressions of a broader Enlightenment era ideal, that beauty experience and sensory indulgence were pathways to understanding one's place in the world, or perhaps just an excuse for really elaborate fruit parties. You take a moment to sneak outside before the guests arrive. The sky is blushing with twilight. The orangery windows reflect soft orange and rose. You spot a servant walking carefully with a covered tray. You guess it's either precious figs or a parrot in disguise. Hard to say. Back inside, the soiree begins. A string quartet plays a piece titled The Ananas Waltz. A troupe of dancers in pineapple print sashes performs a slow circling movement that vaguely resembles a harvest celebration, or a summoning ritual. Hard to say. The Marquise makes her entrance flanked by footmen carrying twin pineapples in mirrored boxes. Everyone claps, someone faints. A poet drops his wine in sheer emotional response. You take your post by the refreshment table, watching the social ballet unfold. Conversations drift by. Well, her pineapple was smaller last season, I'm told. He claims to have tasted one fresh, but you know how sailors lie. It's less about the sweetness and more about the silhouette, darling. You sip a cordial and nod politely. A nobleman with a pineapple cane corners you to explain his theory about fruit hierarchy and marital fidelity. You excuse yourself with a classic servant move, strategic disappearance. You escape to the garden once more, slipping through a side door as laughter echoes behind you. Out here, it's quieter. A few scattered lamps illuminate the paths. Crickets chirp with the lazy rhythm of late evening. You sit beneath an arbor and stretch your legs. Your head is full of soft music-powdered wigs and the scent of caramelized fruit. The party continues behind you, dancers spinning, poets sighing, the marquise likely fanning herself with her own invitation. But you're at peace out here, cradled in the arms of night air and stone paths. You tilt your head back, watching the stars blink awake, and you wonder how the pineapple, just a spiky tropical fruit, ended up the honored guest of 1,000 tiny kingdoms. You smile to yourself, because really what's more fitting? You close your eyes. The last thing you hear before drifting off is a guest stumbling out into the night, murmuring, "It tasted like sun and perfume and longing." Same, you think. Same. Dawn brings with it a peculiar summons, hand-delivered, embossed with gold leaf, and smelling faintly of molasses and linen starch. You blink at the card in your hand. By decree of the Duc de Marange, you are hereby requested to attend a pineapple power negotiation, third-tier garden wing. You stare at it a long moment. You have no idea what that means. But then most things at Versailles make no sense until you're waist-deep in them. So you dress quietly, straighten your modest cravat, and head toward the garden wing, where the windows always fog from overwatered ferns and poorly timed ambition. You find the room small, overly ornate, smelling of chartreuse and antique mold, and slip inside. 10 nobles are seated at a curved table, each with a notebook, a cup of chicory, and a decorative miniature pineapple in front of them. You're offered one too. Yours is carved from ivory. You cradle it awkwardly. Today's agenda, the Duke declares, centers on the equitable distribution of pineapple display, hours between court factions. Of course it does. One mainstream fact status objects in Versailles, including rare fruits like pineapples, were often subject to scheduling, sharing, and even formalized borrowing systems. If you didn't own one, you might rent or reserve one for a particular event. Such objects were as much about logistics as ownership. The problem at hand, the Montclair family claims their pineapple has been unfairly restricted to mornings when foot traffic is low. The Duval cousins insist theirs has seniority and thus deserves the sunset slot. The Duke of Plows is demanding parity based on Rhine circumference. Someone brings out a measuring ribbon. You sit back in your chair and sip the lukewarm chicory. The meeting spirals. Charts are unrolled. Witnesses are called. A valet testifies with what seems like tears in his eyes that he once saw the Duval pineapple being left overnight on an unlined silver tray. One quirky detail. Among the more obsessive court protocols was the meticulous tracking of fruit placement. Some nobles kept written records of how many visitors their pineapple display attracted, treating them as performance metrics for social currency. You're assigned the role of neutral observer, which mostly involves pretending to take notes while making sketches of everyone's wigs. They're quite elaborate today. One includes a tiny bird perched on a ribboned perch. You think the bird is real. Historians still argue whether such object diplomacy was truly meaningful or just absurd theater. But many agree these negotiations mirrored larger tensions of court politics, who got what, when, and how visibly. After 2 hours of debate, a compromise is proposed, alternating days and rotating pedestals. Everyone groans, but no one wants to argue further. The Montclairs request a public apology. The Duvals demand a poem in response. The meeting ends with a toast not of wine, but of pineapple essence diluted with elderflower, which tastes mostly like florals and regrets. You flee the garden wing the moment it's socially acceptable, stepping into the shaded courtyard, where the air feels less ceremonial. There, beneath the creeping vines and potted lemon trees, you find a familiar figure, Victoire, the tapestry artist from the Gentle Fruit Society, sitting on a stool and sketching pineapples from memory. She looks up and smiles. They're more fun to imagine than to actually taste, aren't they? You nod, sitting beside her. They're like mirrors. Everyone sees something different. She hums thoughtfully, threading a gold strand into the design. They make people dream. That's useful, even if it's foolish. The two of you sit in companionable silence, watching sunbeams filter through the leaves and dust. After a time, she asks, "Want to see something ridiculous?" You nod without hesitation. She leads you around the corner to a small carriage shed once used for hauling citrus, but now holding a curious contraption, a pineapple display cart recently redesigned. It's glass on all sides, trimmed with velvet, and has a seat inside for a guard to ride with the fruit. "Unveiling's next week," she whispers. "They're calling it the Pineapple Parade." Of course they are. You take a turn sitting inside beside a fake pineapple for testing. It's quiet, warm, oddly peaceful. You imagine the real pineapple riding regally past cheering crowds, unaware of the logistical ballet surrounding it. Just sitting there, soaking up admiration like a little sun god in a thorny crown. Later that day, you're asked to deliver a note to the kitchen. On your way, you peek into the pantry and see a real pineapple, not a polished specimen, just one set aside for juicing. No fanfare, no cushion, just fruit. You pick it up, feel the weight of it in your hands. Its skin is rough, imperfect. It smells sharp, sweet, a little wild. You set it back down and smile. As dusk falls, you wander through the lesser gardens where fewer nobles roam, and more gardeners hum under their breath. Fireflies begin to blink. A cat lounges on a bench shaped like a grapevine. You sit on a low stone wall, resting your feet, listening to the slow sigh of the fountain nearby. All around you silence the gentle rustle of leaves, the knowledge that tonight somewhere in Versailles, a pineapple is being dusted for its next appearance. And somehow that's enough. This morning's assignment is simple, they say, a quiet task they promise. You should know better by now. You're instructed to escort a pineapple, yes, another one to a portrait session. Not just any portrait, though. This one is for a diplomat from the Danish court who has requested a painting emphasizing shared Enlightenment values and seasonal fruit. Naturally, Versailles has interpreted this as include the pineapple, give it center stage, and possibly a laurel wreath. You make your way to the grand atelier, where the scent of oil paint and powdered wigs hangs in the air like stubborn fog. The artist is already hard at work, a swarthy man with ink-stained sleeves and an expression of weary intensity. He's sketching rapidly, murmuring about composition and the radiant aura of botanical dignity. His subject, a full-length portrait of the diplomat, posed beside a table upon which sits the most photogenic pineapple available today. One mainstream fact: pineapples were often used in formal art and portraiture in the 18th century as symbols of wealth, worldliness, and access to the exotic. While many depictions were idealized or stylized, the mere presence of the fruit suggested cosmopolitan sophistication and colonial reach. You're asked to adjust the pineapple's angle again and again. First, it must appear curious, then benevolent, finally quietly triumphant. The diplomat asks if it can look more intelligent. You begin to suspect the pineapple is handling this better than you are. One quirky detail: some aristocratic portraits of the time included props like globes, books, and exotic fruit, staged to suggest the subject's breadth of knowledge and refined palate, even if behind the scenes they had no idea what the fruit tasted like. One famously aloof noble once requested that his painted pineapple be given a more aristocratic rind. Historians still argue whether these portrait props were sincere attempts at self-branding, or simply part of Versailles' layered performance culture. Regardless, the fruit became a stand-in for virtue intellect, or just good taste, quite literally. The session continues. The pineapple is now being lightly dusted with powdered gold to enhance its sheen. A footman polishes its base. You meanwhile are posted nearby, tasked with ensuring the room remains free of sudden breezes or impolite questions. The painter steps back and sighs. It looks almost too real. Perhaps it needs mystery. You nod as if this is a completely normal sentence. Eventually, the diplomat is satisfied. The pineapple is carefully removed, its short career in diplomacy complete, and whisked back to its storage cushion. You're thanked faintly and left in the empty atelier with the scent of turpentine and fleeting ambition. You wander the palace corridors, still tasting gold dust in the air. You end up near the smaller galleries where forgotten portraits hang at strange angles, gathering dust and minor legends. One shows a noblewoman holding a pineapple like a scepter. Another features a child offering one to a goose. No one remembers why. You sit for a while in one of the side alcoves, legs stretched, head tilted back against cool stone. From down the hall comes the soft clicking of heeled shoes and whispered conversation, someone debating the merits of fig versus plum as diplomatic offerings. Later in the servants' wing, a small commotion has broken out. A crate has arrived from the coast, contents 2 pineapples, one mildly bruised. The kitchen staff inspects them like surgeons. The bruised one is set aside with great ceremony, declared still serviceable for garnish. A scullery maid asks if you've ever actually enjoyed pineapple. You think for a moment. Maybe once in a tart made by a bored cook, who didn't have to make it look like a crown jewel. Maybe once when no one else was watching. Dinner in the staff quarters is plain but comforting. Stew, bread, a bit of salted plum. The pineapple is for once not invited, and no one misses it. You finish your meal and step outside into the balmy dusk. The air smells of lavender and warm earth. Overhead, stars begin to freckle the sky. You make your way to the orangery, not for a task this time, just to see it again. Inside, under soft candlelight and the gentle rustle of leaves, the pineapples sleep in rows. They look peaceful, mysterious, a little smug. You walk among them, each one nestled in its own ceramic pot, each one tended like a small royal child. You place your hand near one, not touching, just close, and feel the faint heat of a day's stored sun. You wonder about the people who will see it next, who will name it, who will decorate it, who will never once consider eating it. You smile, and for the first time today, you feel rested. You wake to rain, gentle, persistent, and doing its best to turn the palace's gravel paths into soup. Versailles under gray skies is a rare sight. The light softens. The paint peels politely. The courtiers move more slowly, like damp butterflies unsure of their wings. Your task today, deliver the invitation to the Pineapple Fashion Showcase. Yes, it's exactly what it sounds like. The Marquise de la Pomme is hosting a parade of fruit-inspired fashion and has somehow determined that you are now the official courier of invitations, honorably entrusted with a basket of wax-sealed scrolls and a pair of waterproof slippers. You make your rounds beneath an enormous umbrella, dodging startled ducks and gossiping footmen. Each scroll is received with gasps, giggles, and the occasional knowing nod. At last, one nobleman says, "A reason to wear my citrus epaulettes again." Back in your quarters, you towel off only to be summoned for a fitting. You are, it seems, part of the show. You're led to a chamber where seamstresses swarm like industrious bees, stitching gold thread into silks the color of sunrise and parrot feathers. The scent of starch and nervous ambition clings to the air. One mainstream fact: Versailles fashion was always theatrical, but themed attire, especially for masked balls or novelty events, reached new levels of absurdity in the 18th century. Designers would draw inspiration from the natural world, colonial trade, or whatever item the hostess had most recently become obsessed with. Pineapples were no exception. Your outfit includes green satin breeches, a tunic printed with subtle pineapple patterns, and unfortunately, a ruffle collar shaped like pineapple leaves. You try not to make eye contact with yourself in the mirror. One quirky detail: some noblewomen reportedly wore headdresses shaped like pineapples, complete with gilded spines and veils that mimicked the texture of the rind. The effect was meant to be regal, yet approachable. Many looked like mildly irritated fruit bowls. Historians still argue whether these themed events were satire, sincerity, or something stranger, a form of self-aware performance in which nobles both indulged and mocked their own decadence. The fashion show takes place in the Hall of Mirrors, temporarily redecorated for the occasion. Velvet pineapples dangle from the chandeliers. The mirrors are etched with golden fruit motifs. Even the footmen wear matching sashes that read, "Pride of the Tropics." You're slotted between a woman dressed as a guava and a man whose ensemble seems to involve 5 bananas and a cape. You walk slowly down the corridor, suppressing the urge to laugh, cry, or break into a tropical dance. Applause ripples through the room as the Marquise appears wearing a gown that resembles a pineapple from hem to headdress. Her sleeves glisten with crystal dewdrops. Her corset is embroidered with golden fruit blossoms. A small trained parrot sits on her shoulder wearing a matching hat. You bow. The parrot chirps. The show continues, pineapples sculpted into fan shoes with fruit-shaped buckles, a monocle that somehow glows faintly amber. Nobles clap, sip cordial, and pretend not to be wildly jealous of each other's interpretations. You're handed a goblet of pineapple champagne, sparkling a little too sweet, and asked for your thoughts. You think for a moment. It's ripe with symbolism. The room erupts in laughter and nods of approval. You've apparently said the exact right thing. Later, back in your simpler clothes, you sneak out into the gardens. The rain has stopped. The sky is smeared with clouds like soft linen. You pass a marble statue now, sporting a pineapple garland. Someone's tied a ribbon around its wrist. In the lesser orangery, you catch sight of the newest pineapple shipment fresh from Martinique. The leaves are longer, greener, slightly twisted at the tips, like ribbons caught in a breeze. You lean close and inhale. It smells like sunshine, molasses, and something you can't quite name. You return to the Hall of Mirrors after dark. The guests are gone, but the decorations remain. You sit in a high-backed chair watching your own sleepy reflection shimmer across a dozen angled panes. All around you the glitter of gold, the scent of sugar, the echo of fruit-shaped dreams. It's ridiculous, of course it is, but it's beautiful too. You drift slowly into sleep as candlelight dances on velvet and a quiet harpsichord plays one final lullaby. You wake with a pineapple in your hands. Not a metaphorical one, a real one, rough, cool, slightly damp. No note attached, just the fruit itself, sitting neatly on the pillow beside you like a bizarre breakfast guest. You blink at it. It blinks at nothing. There's only one possible explanation: you've been given courier duty again. Down in the kitchen, the staff feigns ignorance. No idea how it got there, the head cook says, smirking. But if you're holding it, you're probably part of the plan. And so, off you go, pineapple tucked into a linen wrap, cradled like an exotic relic toward the lower wing of the palace where the perfumers reside. Yes, perfumers. Today it turns out your pineapple has a destiny far removed from syrup or centerpieces. Today, it will be smelled. One mainstream fact. In the 18th century, perfumers often drew inspiration from new and exotic imports, and pineapple, while tricky to preserve, became an object of aromatic curiosity. Though it didn't distill easily into essential oil, its scent was mimicked using combinations of other notes: sugar, citrus, jasmine, and musk. You arrive at the fragrance room, a place where sunlight filters through stained glass in hues of rose and mint. Bottles of every shape line the walls, some shaped like teardrops, others like tiny busts of Apollo. A soft, soapy aroma hangs in the air, mingling with something sharper: clove, maybe, or crushed basil. Madame Bresson, the royal perfumer, greets you in a gown that smells like freshly laundered secrets. She lifts the pineapple from your arms and inhales deeply. She says, needs memory. You are not sure what this means. She sets the pineapple on a silk pad and begins assembling ingredients: lemon zest, sugar crystals, honeysuckle water, a dash of civet you try not to ask, and a splash of something labeled Dream of Wind. One quirky detail: some 18th century perfumes included ingredients more symbolic than aromatic. Dream of Wind, for instance, was a trade name for a blend of neroli, apple blossom, and a compound derived from pine resin, meant to evoke distant landscapes and high-born longing. Madame Bresson dabs the mixture onto a small strip of parchment and waves it beneath your nose. You inhale and feel instantly transported to a lush imaginary island with warm breezes and the faint sound of drums. Historians still argue whether these scent creations were accurate reflections of their source materials or romanticized abstractions. Some suggest that the pineapple perfumes of the period were more about the idea of the tropics than the reality evoking mystery, otherness, and empire. Madame hands you a bottle. Deliver this to the Duchess of Noirfontaine and tell her it's called Whispers of the Ananas. You pocket the glass vial carefully and head out. On your way through the gallery of sculptures, you pass a footman attempting to polish a marble pineapple held by a statue of Venus. He pauses, looks at your bottle, and says, "Didn't know fruit could whisper." You smile faintly and keep moving. At the Duchess's chambers, you're ushered in by a maid who barely glances at you. The Duchess herself is reclining on a fainting couch beneath a canopy embroidered with olives and bees. She accepts the perfume with the reverence usually reserved for holy relics. She dabs it onto her neck and closes her eyes. Like a summer wind, she murmurs, one that smells like ships and sugar and stolen moments. She offers you a sugared orange peel and waves you out. You eat the orange peel thoughtfully as you walk. Back in the servants' hall, you're handed another note, of course, and this one is from the palace's unofficial poet in residence. He wants help composing a fruity epic, something in blank verse possibly featuring a pineapple-themed prophecy. You agree because why not? The poet meets you in the outer gardens, armed with a quill, a picnic blanket, and a half-eaten pear. "Tell me everything you know," he says dramatically, "about pineapples." You recount your stories, the displays, the duels, the powdered wigs, the perfume. He listens with wide eyes, scribbling furiously. At one point he gasps and writes, "O fruit divine, whose crown doth pierce the heavens." One mainstream fact makes its way in: pineapples were considered so luxurious and scarce that simply possessing one conferred the illusion of wealth, taste, and global connection. In this way, the fruit became both prop and protagonist. One quirky detail: there is a real documented moment where a noblewoman reportedly carried a pineapple around a ball without ever setting it down, cradling it like a lapdog, cooing to it between dances. Historians still argue whether such acts were sincere infatuation, ironic performance, or subtle social critique. Either way, they were talked about for weeks. As the sun sets, the poet wraps up his ode with a flourish and declares, "I shall call it the crowned sweetness of distant shores." You part ways and stroll once more into the twilight of Versailles, your steps soft on damp cobblestones. Somewhere in the palace, a perfumed duchess is dreaming of pineapples. Somewhere else, a poem is being recited to no one in particular. And near the kitchens, someone is probably arguing about Rhine symmetry again. You sit beneath an ivy-wrapped archway and close your eyes. The scent of that strange bottled paradise still lingers in the air, like longing, like home, like fruit that's always just out of reach. It's well past midnight, and you're asleep deeply, blissfully so, until a knock comes that's much too polite to ignore. 3 taps just firm enough to be urgent, just soft enough to suggest a silk glove was involved. You groan. A note is slipped under your door. You unfold it with bleary eyes and read "Urgent pineapple rehearsal. Salon de théâtre, full costume, no bananas this time." You sigh, of course. 20 minutes later, you're stumbling through the West Wing in a borrowed costume that smells faintly of cinnamon and regret. You arrive at the small salon-turned-stage where a troupe of court actors is already mid-chaos, arguing about line delivery and fruit placement. You are apparently playing the role of Le Gardien de l'Ananas, a quiet, brooding figure whose main job is to wield the sacred pineapple on stage and protect it from pirates, poets, and pastry chefs. You do not have any lines. You do, however, have a hat shaped like a fruit bowl. One mainstream fat court theater in 18th century France was often whimsical and filled with allegory. Fruit and flowers frequently stood in for political figures, emotions, or philosophical ideas. These performances, while often ridiculous on the surface, offered a way to discuss serious matters without technically saying anything serious. The play, titled The Voyage of Ananas, is a fever dream in verse. Scene 1 features the fruit being discovered by a handsome explorer in a forest of singing vines. Scene 2 involves a love triangle between the pineapple, a pomegranate, and a distracted duchess. Scene 3, well, you're in Scene 3. You roll the pineapple out slowly under spotlight. You do your best to look intense and mysterious, though you mostly feel like a tired waiter in a very niche restaurant. One quirky detail: it's documented that noble salons sometimes held fruit dramas, short plays, or pantomimes, where exotic produce played symbolic roles. At one banquet in 1764, a nobleman dressed as a fig delivered a monologue about unripe ambition. It was met with thunderous applause and a small scandal. Historians still argue whether these performances were genuine allegory or satire, aimed at the decadence of court life. Either way, fruit symbolism was taken very seriously, especially if it rhymed. Scene 4 devolves into a dream sequence. You watch from the wings as dancers in pair costumes spin to a harp solo, while someone dressed as a cinnamon stick recites haiku. You consider lying down on the prop cart and simply not getting up. But then the final act begins: the coronation of the pineapple. The Marquise de la Pomme steps on stage radiant in a glittering yellow gown and a tiara shaped like pineapple leaves. She delivers a heartfelt monologue about beauty isolation and the heavy burden of admiration. It is somehow moving. The play ends in gentle applause. You wheel the pineapple off stage with all the dignity you can muster. Backstage, the actors break into laughter and remove their fruit accessories with practiced relief. You hang up your fruit bowl hat and grab a leftover pastry from a tray near the curtain. Almond and honey, possibly shaped like a lemon? Hard to say. As you make your way out into the cool night air, you realize something: you actually enjoyed that. Not because it made sense. It didn't. Not because it was deep. It wasn't. But because somehow it fit. Here, in a world where pineapples wear crowns and courtiers debate rind firmness, a fruit-based drama feels inevitable. You stroll through the dim halls, the echo of your soft footsteps mingling with the faint strains of a lute being tuned in the distance. Most of Versailles is asleep now. Only a few candlelit windows remain. Somewhere, someone's reading poetry to a sleepy parrot. Somewhere else, a footman polishes a fruit display just in case morning comes too fast. You find your usual bench in the garden courtyard, the stone cool and familiar. You sit lean back and let the stillness wrap around you like a velvet cloak. Above the stars blink slowly like sleepy eyes. You think of the pineapple now, resting in a prop trunk dusted in glitter and surrounded by ribbons. You wonder what role it will play next. Dancer, dignitary, dessert. It doesn't matter. Here it will always be more than fruit. You yawn deeply and stretch your arms. The last thing you remember before drifting off is the soft clatter of someone dropping a lychee-shaped brooch in the hallway, and the quiet content sigh of a world where even tropical fruit gets a standing ovation. By now, your mornings have adopted a predictable rhythm, awaken to a task, spend the day entangled in some pineapple-related ritual, fall asleep, mildly confused, and repeat. But today things are different. Today you are summoned not to the halls of music, nor the kitchens, nor even the orangery. Today you're summoned to the apothecary wing. Again. You arrive to find the air thick with incense and something vaguely medicinal. Shelves line the walls, stuffed with bottles labeled in looping script, essence of serenity, tincture of quiet valor, extract of curiosity. You're not sure if you're in a laboratory or a well-meaning spell shop. The apothecary greets you with his usual sigh and a mortar full of crushed herbs. The Marquis has caught wind, he says, of the latest English pamphlet. You nod solemnly as if you've also read it. You haven't. One mainstream fact, he continues pausing to grind something pungent and teal, is that in the 18th century, pineapples were sometimes believed to have medicinal properties. Not because they did, but because they should. They were rare, they were expensive, and that made people trust them. You're handed a scroll. It's titled, On the Tempering of Female Vapors Through Ananas Distillate. You manage not to laugh. Apparently, a certain sect of fashionable doctors now believes pineapple juice can calm the nervous system, reduce melancholia, and somehow restore one's moral balance. The Marquis has requested a trial. You're to prepare the tonic. You chop. You stir. You add a drop of rosewater and a whisper of honey. The apothecary drizzles in something alarming that smells like nutmeg and ocean. Together, you bottle it in a narrow glass vial sealed with wax and hope. Then you deliver it to her. She receives it in her canopy bed, surrounded by embroidered pillows and a parakeet in a miniature cradle. She sips, considers, then announces, I feel approximately 5% less hysterical. One quirky detail. Some nobles seeking new cures for vaguely defined ailments, nerves, vapors, melancholia, were eager to believe in the power of fashionable foods. Pineapple juice was served in engraved silver cups, often mixed with herbs and brandy, and sold as balm for the tired soul. Historians still argue whether these concoctions were the forerunners of modern wellness culture or simply another way to consume luxury under the guise of health. Either way, few of them worked and most tasted like perfume. You're dismissed with a nod and a single sugar cube for reasons no one explains. Back in the hallway, you find the poet in residence slumped against a tapestry, muttering about the noble melancholy of peelings. You steer clear. There are only so many fruit sonnets one person can endure before lunch. You make your way down to the second-tier kitchen, the unofficial headquarters of experimental cordials. There, a few cooks are testing new pineapple reductions to serve in thimbles at tomorrow's garden breakfast. You're handed a tasting spoon. The reduction is thick, dark, and slightly spicy. Says the sous chef. A bit more cinnamon. Less pineapple, you suggest. They stare. You move on. Later that day, you're sent to deliver a menu draft to the Duchesse de Ronfleur, who is planning a small but overly ambitious digestive tasting. Each course features pineapple in some distant or unrecognizable form, pickled, dried, candied, and somehow smoked. She asks for your opinion. You suggest perhaps not all courses need to contain pineapple. She blinks at you like you've spoken Latin backwards. Would you remove the moon from a sky-themed dinner? You apologize, profusely. As the sun begins to sink behind the treetops, you retreat to your usual path along the lesser canal, the one with the mossy stone benches and the silent duck, who always seems to watch you pass. You sit for once without anything to carry, polish, pour, or poeticize. You rest your eyes. Somewhere nearby, a chambermaid recites a pineapple-themed limerick. A page boy struggles with a fruit cart's wheel. The apothecary hums off key while bottling more dubious tonics. And in the hush between all these strange, sweet moments, you think maybe pineapple truly is medicinal. Not for the body, but for the mind. For those willing to slow down, laugh, wonder, forget briefly the heavy crowns and rigid rules. Just fruit, just folly, just something golden to admire when the world gets too gray. You smile, you let the silence in, and then gently sleep takes you again. You awaken to a gentle commotion and a peculiar scent, something earthy, metallic, and faintly floral. As your senses orient, you realize it's not the aroma of food or incense. No, this is the scent of paint, specifically pineapple-scented paint. You're summoned again to the portrait gallery. Today you're told Versailles is unveiling a new series of botanical allegory panels intended to line the north colonnade. Naturally, one of them features a pineapple. But here's the twist, it's not a real one. It's entirely fictional. A pineapple is imagined by a painter who has never actually seen one. You enter the gallery where a dozen artists hover around large canvases dabbing at bright strokes of green and gold. The panel in question depicts a soaring, overripe pineapple atop a mountain of books with lightning striking behind it and a cherub floating overhead offering a monocle. You blink, it's magnificent, and completely unhinged. One mainstream fact. In the 18th century, artists who hadn't encountered certain exotic fruits firsthand often relied on secondhand sketches, rumors, and outright guesswork. This resulted in some highly inaccurate depictions, including pineapples, that looked like fir trees or grenades. The artist, a bespectacled man named Delandre, approaches with a paint-splattered kerchief around his neck. I've infused the work, he explains, with the spirit of tropical enlightenment. You nod cautiously. He continues, the cherub represents curiosity, the monocle discernment, the pineapple civilization's last hope. You watch him mix a new shade of enlightenment gold, using crushed turmeric and shavings from a discarded gilded frame. One quirky detail. A few particularly committed painters at court were known to add symbolic or theatrical elements to fruit portraits. Tiny hidden portraits of nobles, inside grapes, pineapples, sprouting on tree branches, or even fruit-growing eyes to see the truth of empires. Not everyone noticed. Some did and applauded. Historians still argue whether such embellishments were acts of satire or genuine reverence, perhaps both. In a place where meaning was layered like frosting on a millefeuille, even absurdity had prestige. You're invited to bless the completed pineapple by placing a laurel leaf atop its painted crown. You do so with all the gravitas of someone who's now accidentally held 4 different ceremonial titles. Applause follows. A page boy offers you a candied lemon slice in congratulations. You take it and exit stage left. Later that afternoon, you're invited to an art and botany discussion, hosted in the tapestry room, where nobles sit on slightly too small stools, and debate whether the pineapple's form is nature's hexagonal thesis on imperial design. You take notes. Someone quotes Descartes, someone else brings out a pineapple-shaped compass. The room smells like lavender ink and pomander balls. It is quite possibly the sleepiest lecture you've ever attended, and you once sat through a 3-hour poem about celery. Afterward, you're asked to escort the artist Delandre to the orangery for a brief encounter with truth. He's finally being allowed to see a real pineapple. You walk together in silence, passing through sun-dappled halls and the clink of silver from a distant luncheon. He seems nervous, sweaty. When you arrive, the head gardener gently lifts the cloth from the prized fruit. Delandre gasps. "Oh," he whispers, "it's so real." He circles it slowly, sketchbook in hand. I imagined it more solemn. The gardener raises an eyebrow. Delandre begins drawing furiously, muttering about revision and crowns within crowns. You quietly leave him to it. Back in the servants' quarters, you find a group of staff gathered around a game board that looks suspiciously like a map of Versailles, except the tokens are tiny pineapples, and the objective appears to be avoid direct eye contact with nobility while delivering a fruit. You play one round, you win. Your prize is half a biscuit and the respect of 3 valets. As twilight approaches, you're sent to help with preparations for tonight's dinner concert, the theme Tastes of Empire. Each table features a fruit centerpiece, pineapples of course, but also starfruit papayas, even a lone jackfruit, whose smell is politely ignored. You're in charge of polishing the pedestal under the royal pineapple. Again, one mainstream fact. These themed dinners weren't just about food, they were declarations, a way to display France's rich taste and cultural control. The more exotic the centerpiece, the more whispered admiration it attracted. The evening passes in a soft blur candlelight, dancing across silverware lutes, playing minor chords, guests murmuring appreciatively as they chew confit that took 2 days to prepare. No one eats the pineapple, naturally. Instead, one guest paints it, another recites a haiku, a third offers to purchase it for reflection. You find your way outside afterward, following the glow of lanterns to your familiar bench by the ivy wall. You sit legs stretched, arms folded, breath long and slow. You think of Delandre sketching his celestial fruit, of discussions on Rhine geometry, of the smell of turmeric and rosewater. You tilt your head back and let the stars soak into your eyes. And somewhere behind those stars, you imagine a pineapple just floating there, silent golden, watching this strange little world turn. You begin the day in the kitchens, not as a visitor, not even as a reluctant courier, but as an emergency assistant. Word has spread, tonight's royal banquet will include a baked pineapple tart, and the pressure is quite literally rising. The head cook greets you without pleasantries. You're here. Good. Peel slowly, like it's a love letter. You're handed a pineapple ripe regal, slightly smug, and a small silver knife. A team of assistants is already zesting citrus whipping cream and arguing about whether a tart should glow with humility or swagger with spice. You carve carefully the sweet scent of the fruit, instantly perfuming your fingertips. There's something hypnotic about it. The deliberate spiral, the textured rind giving way beneath your blade, the feeling that for once you're doing something grounded. One mainstream fact. By the late 18th century, the French aristocracy had begun to experiment with pineapple in a range of recipes often sweet, occasionally savory, and frequently absurd. Pineapple tarts, puddings, and even jellies were seen at elaborate banquets, though few guests could tell if they actually liked the taste or just the idea. You're given a mixing bowl of golden chunks and asked to stir them into custard, carefully folding in sugared almonds, rose syrup, and a pinch of powdered clove. The air grows thick with sugar and anxiety. The tart is assembled on a silver platter, the size of a carriage wheel. It's a masterpiece of lattice and legend. One cook suggests garnishing it with edible gold flakes. Another suggests writing a sonnet in cinnamon across the crust. Both ideas are accepted. Then disaster. A passing footman stumbles. A tray of pomegranates crashes to the floor. In the shock, the junior baker, poor Claude, drops the pineapple tart. A gasp runs through the kitchen like a cold wind. The tart wobbles. It slides. It lands miraculously on a folded tablecloth, slightly askew, barely bruised. The head cook clutches his chest. One quirky detail. Kitchens at Versailles were the site of many high-drama moments, often involving fruit. In one documented case, a royal baker fainted after burning a gooseberry glaze, believing it would end his career. Another was applauded for salvaging a dropped fig tart by flipping it into a new artistic direction. Historians still argue whether the anxiety around aristocratic food was about flavor presentation or reputation. Likely all three. A successful dish could elevate a cook's status. A failed one might result in exile to the colder parts of the cellar. Claude recovers. You, acting on instinct and adrenaline, delicately realign the tart brush off a few flecks of linen and reapply the gold flakes. Someone produces a cinnamon quill and scrawls the final line of the sonnet, "Where sweetness dares we dare to dream." Applause breaks out in the kitchen. Even the scullery maids clap. The tart is sent off carefully balanced by 2 footmen and a prayer. You retreat to the pantry for a moment, collapsing against a sack of flour with a sigh. Later, back in your own clothes, you pass through the banquet hall. The pineapple tart now sits under a delicate glass dome, surrounded by flickering candles and murmurs of admiration. No one knows it nearly died. You smile faintly. You're handed a note this time from the Marquise de la Paume herself. To the tart rescuer. You are invited to my post-banquet digestif. There will be fruitless rumors and possibly fig liqueur. You arrive to find the salon filled with nobles, reclining like sleepy cats, shoes off corsets slightly loosened. The conversation flows as lazily as the cherry cordial. Someone says, "Do you think the tart was too bold?" Another replies, "It was honest, painfully so." A third, staring at the flickering candelabra, sighs, "It reminded me of Corsica." You're offered a chair beside a sleepy philosopher who murmurs about the existential implications of rind to custard ratios. You nod. Slowly. One mainstream fact. The post-meal salon was often where reputations were sealed. Guests would discuss the food not just as cuisine, but as metaphor. A well-received dish might earn a chef a patron. A controversial one could launch a philosophical debate. One quirky detail. On one occasion, a nobleman reportedly proposed marriage after tasting a tart so perfect he described it as a reflection of divine patience. The tart's creator declined the proposal on grounds of professionalism. Historians still argue whether these fruit-fueled salons were sincere or performative. But in a culture where everything could be theater, perhaps sincerity didn't matter so much as conviction. Eventually, the salon dims. Someone begins to hum. A sleepy hound curls by the hearth. You slip away once again, drawn to the quiet gardens beyond the palace walls. Tonight you walk slowly, your fingers still faintly sticky with sugar. You pause by the reflecting pool and watch a dragonfly hover just above the water's surface, its wings whispering against the air. The moon is full, the air is warm. Somewhere far away, the pineapple tart is being remembered, probably misquoted, definitely mythologized. You sit on your usual bench and lean back with a sigh. It wasn't just fruit today. It was theater risk redemption. It was a reminder that even here where so much is pretend, some things like saving dessert can feel deeply undeniably real. You're halfway through your morning bread when the summons arrives delivered on a plate of warm apricot scones by a boy who looks far too cheerful for this hour. The note is simple colonial growers arriving. Be presentable. Avoid saying humidity or taxes. You swallow hard, finish your bread in 2 bites, and make your way to the south courtyard, where a small diplomatic reception is already unfurling beneath striped awnings and the heavy gaze of sculpted eagles. Today's guests hail from the French Caribbean colonies, Martinique and Saint-Domingue, to be precise. They're planters, traders, and envoys wearing wide-brimmed hats and expressions that mix curiosity, fatigue, and just a hint of passive judgment. They've brought pineapples, but not the Versailles kind. These pineapples are sun-darkened, bruised in places, fragrant and unshaven. They arrive in crates, some split open, others cushioned in straw. The scent hits you immediately, lush, tangy, wild. These are working pineapples, not ones that sit on pillows. One mainstream fact. The Caribbean was central to the pineapple trade. While pineapples grew naturally in South America, it was through colonial plantations in places like Saint-Domingue and Martinique that the fruit became more widely available to Europe. It was labor-intensive, harvested under brutal conditions, and often shipped in tiny, carefully packed quantities for elite consumption. One of the growers, a stooped man named Monsieur Charbon, asks if he might see the palace's famed orangery. He's heard it rivals the tropical heat of his own fields. You're tasked with escorting him. As you walk through the manicured grounds, he watches everything with the calm eye of someone who's seen actual storms. "Do they eat them here?" he asks, nodding toward a painted pineapple on a passing tapestry. You hesitate. Sometimes you admit. He chuckles. "We feed ours to pigs when they turn." At the orangery, he surveys the glowing rows of plants with a tight-lipped expression. The head gardener explains his heating system, his soil formula, his nightly leaf-wiping routine. Charbon listens, then kneels and digs a fingertip into the dirt. "Too dry," he says, and walks on. One quirky detail. Colonial growers often viewed European cultivation efforts with a mix of amusement and irritation. While Versailles pineries were high-tech and high-drama, they were also inefficient and impractical by plantation standards. Some growers even offered advice, most of it ignored. Historians still argue whether the French aristocracy's pineapple mania was a reflection of genuine agricultural interest, or merely another facet of conspicuous consumption. Most agree it had little to do with the people who actually grew the fruit. You guide Charbon back to the courtyard, where small groups have gathered around tasting tables. The colonial pineapples are being sliced and offered, and a debate has broken out over whether they're too honest in flavor. A Viscountess sniffs her sample. "It's a bit brash, don't you think?" You taste it and are nearly knocked sideways. It's bright, fierce, wildly sweet. The kind of flavor that doesn't sit on a velvet cushion, it runs barefoot through hot sand. Charbon watches the crowd, arms folded. They want the fruit, he mutters, but not the story. Later, you catch a snippet of conversation between a courtier and a colonial envoy. It starts with trade agreements and ends with a spirited argument about rind aesthetics. You slip away before someone tries to draw a chart. You find yourself back in the kitchens where a cook is attempting to replicate the Caribbean flavor using imported sugar orange zest and a bit of rum. It's Not close. I've never tasted anything like it, he says. Too alive? You nod? That's the word. Alive. By dusk, the growers are leaving. Crates packed, tastes sampled, opinions mostly unspoken. You help load the last of the pineapples onto the coach and offer Charbonne a farewell nod. He hands you a tiny sliver of dried fruit wrapped in linen. For when you need to remember something real, he says. You keep it in your pocket. That night, the Marquise throws a candlelit dinner to commemorate the visit. The pineapples painted sculpted candle molded make their usual appearances. There are toasts, size-whispered compliments about rind symmetry. But all you can think about is the taste of that fierce fruit and the man who grew it not for art or metaphor, but for living. You sneak away early. Outside, the moon hangs low, casting long shadows over the garden paths. You sit on your favorite bench, unwrap the dried pineapple, and let it melt on your tongue. It tastes like sun, like salt, like truth that doesn't need to explain itself. You close your eyes, and dream not of crowns or carriages, but of fruit growing wild on distant soil, ripening without applause. The next morning brings a calm so rare in Versailles it feels suspicious. No footmen sprinting, no wigs askew, no mid-corridor shouting about misunderstood menus or misaligned pineapples. Just silence. You take your breakfast half a brioche, and something the cook swore was plumb adjacent on the terrace outside the music chamber. The breeze is soft, the sky a sleepy blue, and then drifting faintly on the wind, you hear it. A pineapple cannot be taxed if it is art. You sigh and stand. The voice belongs to the Duc de Valbronn, currently leading a salon discussion under the umbrella title Fruit in the Law, Philosophical Challenges in Botanical Ownership. It's hosted in a small rotunda lined with potted citrus trees and painted cherubs who all appear to be judging you. You slip in quietly, taking a seat between a sleepy harpist and a governess furiously knitting a pear. At the center of the room, a single pineapple polished elevated, and most curiously wearing a tiny paper tag that reads, exempt, one mainstream fact. As pineapples became more prominent as status symbols, questions arose about their economic and symbolic value. Could a pineapple be taxed as food, as an import, as art? In some cases, nobles argued that a pineapple used purely for display was a non-consumable cultural object and therefore not subject to certain levies. A philosopher in a violet waistcoat raises a hand. If I commission a painting of the pineapple and then eat it, is it still art? A marquis counters. If the fruit inspires a dream but rots before it's peeled, does the dream owe duty? You lean back and let the voices wash over you like a soft tide of ludicrous legalism. One quirky detail records show that a Versailles clerk once spent 3 weeks trying to categorize a pineapple sent as a diplomatic gift. His ledgers labeled it in turn as exotic produce, sculptural medium, and finally provocation. Historians still argue whether these debates were genuine attempts at fiscal reform, or simply aristocratic navel-gazing in a more fragrant format. Regardless, they produced a surprising amount of paperwork and at least 2 fruit-related legal loopholes. By the session's end, the pineapple is declared temporarily ineffable, and the conversation shifts to the topic of fruit-driven inheritance disputes. You quietly exit. Later that day, you're approached by the royal librarian, a tall, anxious man, with the gait of someone forever about to sneeze. He's preparing an exhibit titled Pineapples in Print, A Literary Journey, and needs your help locating a volume from the restricted shelf. You follow him to the palace library, easily the dustiest room in Versailles. Endless rows of books stretch up toward a ceiling, fresco of Mercury offering oranges to Apollo. You climb a rolling ladder and retrieve a volume bound in faded green velvet. Inside, a bizarre 16th century tract titled The Moral Geometry of Fruit, complete with woodcut illustrations of pineapples, behaving like people, one dueling a coconut another, writing poetry on a rock. The librarian sighs contentedly. They knew how to publish back then. You help set up the display. The books are open to their most profound pages while artists arrange pineapple-shaped bookmarks and a miniature reading bench with golden tassels. A noblewoman walks by, peers at the open text and murmurs, "So brave to write without knowing what it tastes like." That evening, the library hosts a quiet reading. A small audience gathers to hear excerpts from pineapple-centric poems, essays, and philosophical ramblings, many of them written by people who never saw the fruit outside a sketch. Someone reads aloud from a sermon titled, the prickled blessing, which compares the pineapple to the soul's uncut potential. Someone else recites a limerick about fruit taxation. It does not land. One mainstream fact. The pineapple featured prominently in European literature, sermons, and travelogues, often as a symbol of divine beauty, colonial bounty, or untouchable luxury. Writers who had never even smelled the fruit penned paragraphs praising its virtues as if it were a theological object. You read an excerpt aloud from a letter written by a French naval officer. I held one in my hands only once. It was heavier than I expected and warmer, like carrying the sun's idea of fruit. The room goes quiet. After the reading, you sit for a while in the library's alcove, surrounded by silent books and the faint scent of lemon ink. You think of everything said today of taxed metaphors, dueling fruits, unreadable wisdoms. You think of pineapples in court and dreams in the margins of very confused legal scrolls. You rest your chin on your hands and close your eyes. Somewhere nearby, a page turns, and somewhere else, a clerk is still trying to decide what shelf a pineapple belongs on. You are deep in a nap beside the palace dovecote, dreaming inexplicably about a pineapple playing the harpsichord when someone taps your foot. You jolt awake to find a maid squinting at you beneath her bonnet. They need a courier, she says. Urgent delivery. Pineapple related. Also feathered. You sit up bleary and resigned. Your destination, the royal aviary. Today the pineapple is not being polished, eaten, painted, or philosophized. Today it's going to be performed. Specifically as part of an aviary tableau, a live exhibition, combining bird's fruit and fashion. You're not sure who dreamed this up, but there are whispers the king might attend, and no one's quite sure if he thinks it's satire or science. You arrive to find the aviary courtyard transformed. Bird cages gilded, oversized, unnecessarily baroque line the hedges. Parrots squawk in baritone. Doves coo on cue. A peacock named Marquise struts aggressively near the stage area. One mainstream fact. The French elite were famously fond of exotic animals, and birds were a particular obsession. Versailles aviaries included macaws, parakeets, and even cockatoos, many of them brought from the colonies. These animals often served not only as pets, but as accessories in portraits and pageants. At the center of today's exhibition is a pineapple pedestal surrounded by trained birds. Yes, trained, they've been rehearsing. You're assigned to the presentation circuit, which means you're responsible for walking the pineapple from perch to perch, while various birds either sing bow or flap in appreciation. You're given a script. It's 2 sentences long and includes the phrase civic avian tribute. You are not allowed to improvise. One quirky detail. There are accounts of 18th century bird plays, short performances, in which parrots were trained to mimic words or cues in exchange for tiny fruit rewards. One courtier famously trained a starling to say, "Long live the sugar-laced mango," but it often misfired and shouted, "My boot itches," instead. Historians still argue whether these performances were intended to amuse, astonish, or quietly mock the aristocracy's own excesses. Either way, they were very well attended. You begin your walk. The pineapple, now fitted with a tiny bejeweled diadem, is cradled in a satin-lined bowl. You stop beside a cockatoo who bows. A canary sings a high note. A green parrot says ananas twice before coughing. The audience claps. The performance continues. At the final perch, a pair of finches perform a synchronized flutter. A flutist plays something dreamy, and the peacock, apparently untrained and quite opinionated, attempts to bite the pineapple. You yank it away just in time. Applause, a curtain call. The pineapple is lifted in triumph as a voice calls out, "Bravo, fruit of birds." Backstage, you collapse on a crate beside the trainer, who's feeding grapes to a toucan, wearing a velvet ribbon. "They hit their marks better than half the nobles," he says, grinning. You ask if any of the birds have ever eaten pineapple. Only once, he replies. Didn't end well, too acidic. After a short rest, you're sent to the printmaker's wing to help prepare commemorative programs for tonight's feathered fruit salon. You fold parchment and seal wax stamps, watching as the pages flutter dry beside etchings of pineapples and birds wearing crowns. Later, during the actual salon, the pineapple is displayed on a rotating perch, while guests sip cordial and ask extremely serious questions about whether birds appreciate symbolism. A poet reads a sonnet from the parrot's perspective. It ends with the line, "Even fruit dreams of flight." The crowd sighs, visibly moved. One mainstream fact, pineapples were sometimes used in naturalist illustrations alongside animals and flora as symbols of global exploration. a pineapple next to a parrot. That was the enlightenment in a single etching beauty empire and the illusion of understanding nature through arrangement. One quirky detail. A well-known Versailles guestbook includes a page where a parrot signed by, pecking into ink, and stamping a pineapple-shaped smudge. It became a court-in joke for months. As the evening wanes, guests disperse in gentle spirals of perfume and philosophy. You help carry the pineapple back to its padded box, careful not to jostle the crown. You nod goodnight to the birds, many of whom seem more tired than you. You walk the dim halls toward your quarters, trailing echoes of flutes and feathers. At your door, you find a small note tucked into your shoe. You did well. The parrot liked you. You smile oddly touched. You sit on your cot and untie your boots. The room is quiet. The walls hold steady. And outside, the moon climbs softly feathered in silver. You lay back still half in costume and drift off with the image of a pineapple rising into the sky on iridescent wings. No one stops it. It doesn't need a pedestal now. Just air and maybe applause. You awake to a quiet commotion in the hall, a blend of hushed voices rustling taffeta, and the unmistakable clink of silver trays being transported somewhere important. You peek through your doorway just in time to catch a maid carrying a velvet-lined box, whispering reverently, "For the pedestal." You've heard this phrase before. Today you're told the pineapple will be displayed in the royal chapel. Yes, the chapel. No one seems entirely sure why. Perhaps a theological metaphor got out of hand. Perhaps the archbishop made a joke that was taken seriously. Or perhaps it's just Versailles being Versailles. Regardless, you're roped in again to help with the placement ceremony. You're handed a small brush, a gold-trimmed sash, and a piece of advice: don't stand too close to the altar. The last fruit display blocked a saint. You arrive to find the chapel filled with morning light and a sense of reluctant holiness. Candles flicker along the marble. Stained glass glimmers across the pews. At the center where a reliquary might normally sit, there's a stone pedestal topped with velvet, and at its heart, the pineapple. It has been polished, perfumed, draped in lace. You're not even surprised anymore. One mainstream fact: Versailles was not shy about blending secular luxury with spiritual pageantry. Chapels sometimes hosted musical performances, poetry readings, and unusual dedications. The pineapple's inclusion here, while absurd, follows a recognizable logic if it's rare and revered. Why not place it under divine light? A cleric in white robes clears his throat and begins what he insists is a non-liturgical reflection. He speaks of fruit as creation of cultivation, as metaphor of the pineapple, as an emblem of complexity born from adversity. You stand at the back, resisting the urge to yawn. One quirky detail. It's recorded that in at least one Versailles chapel service, a noble family donated a pineapple as a symbol of gratitude for safe childbirth. The priest reportedly referred to it as the thorned joy of tropical providence. Historians still argue whether such offerings were acts of sincere reverence or performative generosity. But even the most skeptical scholars admit nothing draws attention like placing a fruit where only relics usually rest. After the reflection, a string quartet plays a slow, haunting minuet titled Fructus Altus. The pineapple sits motionless as the music swells around it. Guests murmur their admiration in tones usually reserved for baptisms and royal births. A small child tugs at her nursemaid's sleeve. "Is it magic?" she whispers. The nursemaid nods. It makes people quiet. That's close. Afterward, you help carry the pineapple very slowly back to its temporary chambers. Along the way, you're stopped 3 times by people who want to commune with it. One man kneels, one woman sings, a third offers it a sprig of lavender. Later in the gallery, you find a group of artists sketching the event for tomorrow's broadsheet. One drawing shows the pineapple haloed with divine rays. Another shows it being ascended into the clouds by cherubs. You suggest a more accurate sketch: the pineapple alone on a cushion looking tired. You spend the afternoon helping Madame Bresson, the perfumer, concoct a new blend for the chapel's air pineapple rind, lemon balm incense, and mysteriously ground pearl. To make it feel eternal, she says. Evening brings a small private banquet, hosted by the Bishop of Fontaine, who begins dinner with a toast to the fruit that made the court listen. You, invited as an honorary handler, are seated between a theologian who collects scented candles and a retired dancer now working on a pineapple-inspired ballet. The meal is subdued, refined, and served in precise portions. You taste a pineapple sorbet with basil that makes you want to sit very still for several hours. Dessert is a wafer-thin pastry in the shape of a pineapple's crown, dusted with powdered sugar and quiet expectations. As the dinner ends, the bishop leans in and says, "I think it's all quite silly, of course, but they paid attention, didn't they?" You nod. They always do when fruit is involved. You walk home slowly. Versailles at night is a maze of corridors and candlelight. You pass a hallway where someone is rehearsing a flute solo, another where a seamstress naps in a pile of gold thread, and finally, the windowed gallery where the pineapple now rests alone, back in its glass case staring into nothing. You pause. It looks smaller now, still regal, still ridiculous, but no longer miraculous. You smile and turn away. Outside, the sky is velvet blue. The trees sway gently. You return to your bench beneath the ivy arch and let the day slide from your shoulders like a borrowed cloak. You think of the chapel, of lace and incense, of fruit mistaken for relic, of meaning stitched onto rind, and you drift off wondering if the pineapple dreams of simpler things. Today they're testing your loyalty. At least that's how it feels when you receive your morning summons, hand-delivered by a page boy wearing a tangerine sash and a suspiciously smug expression. The task: escort a pineapple to a royal bath. Yes, you read that correctly. The Queen's handmaidens, inspired by an overheard conversation involving Roman fountains and the sensuous purity of fruit, have organized a bathing ceremony for the pineapple. You consider asking why. You don't. You arrive at the Queen's private bathing chambers to find the tub an oval of white marble inset, with mother of pearl filled with warm water, infused with rose petals, vanilla, and something fizzy. At its center floats a polished wooden tray bearing the chosen pineapple, which sits proudly already wrapped in a silken bathrobe embroidered with its own initials, A.P. Ananas Parisien, presumably. One mainstream fact: bathing rituals at Versailles could be as performative as any ball. While water itself was often met with suspicion, too much exposure could be seen as dangerous. The idea of bathing, especially when paired with art music and fragrance, was deeply fashionable. It was a sensual, curated experience, more theatrical than hygienic. You're handed a soft sponge and instructed to dab gently at the pineapple's surface to refresh its luster. A harpist plays in the corner. A noblewoman sits nearby, pretending to read Virgil, but clearly watching the fruit with religious intensity. The Queen herself does not attend, but she sends a note. May the fruit's clarity reflect our own. One quirky detail: there are whispered accounts of fruits being included in beauty rituals not to be used but to observe. Pineapples in particular were thought to radiate visual cleanliness, and one courtier claimed gazing at one during a steam treatment cured her emotional congestion. Historians still argue whether this trend stemmed from sincere belief in fruit-based virtue or simply a need for novelty in the endless whirl of courtly leisure. Either way, Versailles could turn anything, even washing a pineapple, into a sacred rite. After the bath, the pineapple is gently towel-dried by two gloved attendants and placed in a chaise longue by the window. It is read poetry from a small gold-leaf booklet titled Verses for the Clean. You quietly excuse yourself before someone hands you incense. Back in the main palace, your next task awaits. You're to accompany the pineapple to a moment of reflection in the philosopher's courtyard. You arrive to find 3 scholars, 2 chairs, and 1 pineapple-sized pedestal. You place the fruit reverently. Then you sit. A long silence follows. Finally, one philosopher clears his throat. Do you think it knows? Another answers, it reflects certainly, but does it absorb? The third offers. Is it not ourselves we contemplate through its rind? You nearly fall asleep. One mainstream fact: Enlightenment salons in France were known for their speculative debates, often prompted by unlikely subjects. Pineapples, due to their rarity and complexity, became convenient metaphors for everything from divine design to geopolitical fragility. There were even mock debates where fruit testified in moral arguments. One quirky detail: a minor but memorable text titled Discours sur le silence des fruits suggested that the pineapple's spiky surface represented the defense of inner sweetness, while its crown implied the sovereign solitude of truth. It sold poorly, but was widely quoted by people trying to seem mysterious. You stay for the full session, nodding thoughtfully at phrases like fruital essence and culinary consciousness. At one point, a butterfly lands on the pineapple's crown and everyone gasps. When the session ends, the philosophers shake your hand solemnly and say, "Guard it well." You do not ask what it is. You take the pineapple now, a little drier, a little wiser perhaps, and return it to its velvet cushion in the east wing. On your way out, a maid offers you a lavender biscuit and says, "You looked very philosophical just now." You thank her and head for the gardens. There you find peace again. You walk the long path past the lemon trees and the statue of Athena, who now wears a melon necklace. You pass under rose-covered arches, their petals beginning to brown. Summer is aging slowly. At your favorite bench you sit and unwrap the lavender biscuit. It's sweet, faintly floral, like something a fruit might dream of eating. You lean back, your mind filled with soft music, soft water, soft metaphors. You picture the pineapple floating in its perfume bath, eyes closed, perfectly content. And you smile. For once, everything feels perfectly absurd and perfectly serene. Today begins not with a summons, but a riddle. Slipped under your door, written in elaborate calligraphy on thick parchment. To crown a fruit is not to rule, but to divide what's firm from jewel. Come to the gate where gardens meet and learn the price of taste and heat. You stare at it for a long moment. You've had weirder mornings. Following the rhyme's direction, you find yourself at the south entrance to the royal gardens, where 3 footmen and a historian await beside a gilded cart. Inside the cart, a pineapple, of course. But not just any pineapple. This one is slightly wrinkled, slightly bruised. Its glory days are behind it. Today, says the historian with the gravity of a funeral director, we slice. You blink. It's time. After weeks, no months of polishing, praising, and parading, this particular pineapple has been deemed edible. Today is its final transformation from icon to ingredient. One mainstream fact. Though most pineapples in elite 18th century circles were ornamental, occasionally one would be consumed at the end of its display life. This was often done ceremonially, sliced in front of guests, tasted slowly, discussed reverently. Sometimes the rind was saved and repurposed for decoration or infused spirits. You're led to a small candlelit chamber known unofficially as the tasting room, though it's more reminiscent of a chapel than a kitchen. A long table is laid with linen crystal glasses and a single gold-handled knife resting on a silk cushion. You are not alone. The guest list is limited: 2 nobles, 1 poet, a botanist, and you, because apparently you've become part of this fruit's biography. The historian speaks first. We gather here not to devour, but to experience. Then comes the slicing. The knife is lifted, the fruit turned gently. One slow, clean cut. The rind separates with a wet whisper. The aroma that escapes is rich, almost heady. Sugar, citrus, something floral, something that smells like distance. Slices are served, thin, precise, plated on porcelain with hand-painted pineapples around the edge. Of course, one quirky detail: some documented tastings treated the act of eating a pineapple as a multi-sensory ritual. Guests would observe the cut, smell the exposed flesh, chew slowly, and then describe the experience in poetic or scientific terms. It was less about flavor and more about witnessing. The botanist sniffs his slice like it's a rare orchid. The poet closes her eyes before taking a bite. Then it's your turn. You lift the silver fork and taste. It's good, bright, sweet. But more than anything, it tastes like memory, like ceremony, like the closing of a very strange book you've lived inside for weeks. Historians still argue whether these moments were sincere or performative. But sincerity isn't the point, is it? At Versailles, performance is reality. The poet speaks voice soft. It's sharper than I imagined. The botanist mutters acidity, consistent with tropical terroir. One noble declares it tastes philosophical. You do not laugh, you just eat your slice in silence. The leftover rind is wrapped carefully and carried off to the apothecary for tinctures, perfumes, maybe even paper. Nothing is wasted, not here. Afterward, you help carry the serving dish back to the kitchen. On it, a small pool of golden juice glows faintly in the candlelight. The head cook wipes it away with a reverent cloth. In the corridor, the poet catches up to you. What will they do now? She asks, without that pineapple. You shrug. There's always another one. And she nods because of course there is. That evening, a quiet ball is held, not in celebration, but in commemoration. Guests wear golden accents symbolic of rind and sweetness. A harpsichord plays slow dances. No new pineapples are present. The pedestal in the salon is left empty. You watch nobles drink pineapple cordial and pretend not to be mourning a fruit. You step out early and return to your garden bench, unsure whether to laugh or cry. In your pocket, you still have the riddle from this morning. You smooth it out, read it again. It's a little sticky now. That feels right. Above you, the stars bloom across the sky, calm and distant. You whisper, To crown a fruit is not to rule, and think of a slice on a plate, sunlight in a mouth, and how even absurdity can leave you full. You close your eyes and dream of pineapples not on pillows but in palms tasted shared and finally let go. You rise late the next day, not out of laziness, but because no one knocks, no parchment slips under the door, no footman bursts in breathless with a fruit emergency. For the first time in recent memory, the pineapple does not demand your presence. And yet, you feel its absence. The palace is oddly quiet, as if the whole place is exhaling after weeks of ceremonial consumption. There are no arguments about rind angles, no rehearsals for fruit-inspired plays. Just the creak of wooden floors, the flutter of curtains, the long, lazy hum of a morning that forgot to be important. You wander the halls aimlessly, still expecting someone to ask you to carry something expensive and edible. Instead, you find the Comtesse de Bellepine in the East Salon, feeding sugar cubes to a rabbit and gazing wistfully at an empty pedestal. "I do miss it," she murmurs. "I know it was ridiculous, but I miss the ridiculous." You sit with her a while. She tells you that someone tried to launch a fig revival this morning. No one was impressed. One mainstream fact: after the decline of pineapple obsession in certain circles, other fruits tried unsuccessfully to fill the void. Passion fruit, star fruit, even the humble fig had its moment, but nothing quite matched the combination of shape scarcity and symbolism that the pineapple delivered so perfectly. A servant passes by, offering small lemon cakes. You both accept one. The Comtesse dips hers in tea and sighs. "Do you think it's possible," she asks, "that the fruit understood us?" You do not answer. Later, you head to the storage archives beneath the orangery. A quiet space, cool, dusty. Somewhere between a library and a cellar. You're searching for something you don't yet know how to name. You find it by accident. Tucked inside an old inventory book, wedged between listings for copper basins and decorative grapes, is a sketch, small, ink-streaked, hastily drawn. It's a pineapple, not posed or perfect, just sitting on a stool, slightly askew. It's labeled simply, "The Quiet One." One quirky detail: among court artists and chroniclers, many kept unofficial records, drawings and notes, too candid or absurd for formal presentation. These scraps, now preserved in archives, show pineapples dropped, eaten mid-rehearsal, or left forgotten under chairs. A reminder that behind every ritual was an actual fruit, real and perishable. You take the sketch and bring it upstairs. Back in your quarters, you pin it beside your bed, not as decoration, as acknowledgement. You spend the afternoon helping in the garden, real garden, no pedestals. Just dirt tools, plants with actual purposes. The gardener hands you a trowel and points to a patch of soil needing attention. "No fruit crown required today," he says, smiling. You dig, you plant, you sweat a little. It feels good. That evening you return to the servants' hall where supper is simple and loud. Someone passes you a bowl of strawberries. Another sings a song about a particularly vengeful peach. It's nice. After the plates are cleared, someone stands and makes a toast to the fruit that made us dream. Everyone claps, even the head cook who once wept over a sunken tart. You walk through the gardens one last time before bed. The moon is brighter than usual. The fountains ripple in lazy rhythm. The stone bench is cool beneath you, and beside you, someone's left a pineapple-shaped candle gently flickering. No note, no name, just the glow. You sit there a while, remembering the days when every corridor smelled like syrup, when nobles recited haikus to rind, when you believed just a little that fruit could be sacred. You smile, tilt your head to the stars, and whisper, "You were never just decoration." You close your eyes. Tonight your dreams will be calm. There are no parades, no duels, no tarts in peril, just you, a garden, and a pineapple on a stool finally allowed to rest. It begins again with the sound of scissors. Soft, steady snips from beyond your chamber door. Curious, you open it and peer down the corridor. Two seamstresses are there, arms full of yellow satin gold brocade and what appears to be an embroidered pineapple the size of your head. One notices you and beams. "Perfect timing," she says. "We're making costumes for the harvest tableau vivant. You're late." You're not surprised, just mildly disappointed in yourself for thinking the pineapple chapter was truly over. The tableau vivant, you're told, is tomorrow, a theatrical still life staged in the grand courtyard, where nobles and staff alike pose as scenes from agriculture, art, and mythology. You've been cast as the spirit of cultivation, which mostly involves standing barefoot, holding a fruit basket and looking serene. You try to protest. I don't radiate serenity. The seamstress shrugs. Just hold the fruit. It does most of the work. One mainstream fact, tableaux vivants were popular entertainment in 18th century aristocratic circles, living statues meant to mimic paintings, classical scenes, or grand allegories. They were often absurdly intricate with costumes rivaling those of formal theater, and were usually staged during seasonal feasts or royal birthdays. You're fitted into your costume loose linen trousers, a vine-draped sash, and a crown of wheat. The basket you're given includes apples, grapes, and yes, a pineapple. But this one is different. No gilding, no pedestal, no poetic escort, just a fruit among fruits. You find it comforting. One quirky detail. There are stories of servants sneaking their own props into tableaus, tiny jokes only the kitchen staff or gardeners would notice. A turnip labeled Moon Goddess. A carrot passed off as a divine staff. Once someone managed to include a cabbage with a painted smile. Historians still argue whether these were forms of rebellion or affection. Maybe both. Versailles had room for satire as long as it was beautiful. You rehearse your pose in the courtyard, the afternoon sun casting long shadows. The director, a stressed nobleman with a tiny goatee and an oversized vision, waves his arms furiously. No, the pineapple must face east. You turn it. He frowns, a little more pensive. Make it look like it understands agriculture. You nod solemnly. The final tableau includes you two girls as nymphs holding baskets of figs, a gardener dressed as Dionysus, and a child painted entirely gold, pretending to be the essence of summer. You hold your pineapple like it's a sleeping bird. The director claps. Perfect? Now don't breathe tomorrow. That evening, you're invited to a small gathering in the painter's wing. They've heard about the tableau and want to sketch you in quiet repose. You sit on a stool still in costume as three artists take turns capturing your likeness beside the pineapple. One paints you with angel wings. Another exaggerates the fruit until it looks like a glowing orb. The third draws only your hands cupping the pineapple like a votive. It's strangely moving. They give you the sketches as gifts. You tuck them into your coat, unsure whether to laugh or frame them. Later, you return to the gardens. The palace is golden in the late light. Music drifts from the windows. Somewhere someone's reading their second poem of the evening to an unbothered goose. You sit on your bench, the sketches in your lap, the cool stone grounding you. You think about how far the fruit has traveled from pedestal to portrait, from perfume to philosophy. And now, resting quietly in a basket, no longer the star, just a piece of the story. It's better that way. You stretch your legs, the breeze picks up, leaves stir across the path in soft swirls. You imagine the pineapple dreaming not of applause or poetry, but of sun on skin, of soil, of growing, of simply being. You smile. You've come to understand something Versailles never quite did, that beauty doesn't always need framing, and meaning doesn't always need metaphor. Sometimes a fruit is just a fruit, and that can be enough. The next morning is unusually quiet, not in the absence of chaos way, but in the anticipatory hush that precedes something ceremonial. A pause in the palace's breath. You dress quickly, instinct guiding your hands now. Your feet take you almost without thought back to the courtyard, where today's tableau vivant will unfold. The space is transformed. Silken backdrops ripple in the breeze. Painted hay bales are arranged just so. Each performer stands already in position, cloaked in myth, produce, or metaphor. A cello hums gently in the corner, tuning itself into reverence. And there, waiting patiently in your fruit basket, the pineapple. You lift it carefully. It's heavier than yesterday. Or maybe it just feels that way. Your spot is center left under a garland of ivy framed by two sculpted archways. You're told to pose with your weight on one foot and your chin angled slightly toward the orchard. The director touches your elbow and whispers, "Now, hold, hold. Now, breathe. But don't look like you're breathing." You try your best. One mainstream fact, tableaux vivants often lasted for hours at a time. Performers would freeze in place while guests strolled past whispering interpretations. It was art imitating life Versailles, at its most self-referential. From your perch you watch the crowd gather. Courtiers in layered finery shuffle softly across the gravel. Fans flutter. Conversations hush. People tilt their heads, nod solemnly, make quiet comments like, "Ah, the pineapple represents legacy," or "the curvature of the melon." Yes, very bold. You say nothing because you are fruit now. One quirky detail. It's said that during one living statue event, a performer sneezed mid-scene and claimed it was the wind moving through myth. No one questioned it. Another performer once fainted into a crate of oranges and was applauded for dramatic flair. Historians still argue whether these tableaux were sincere expressions of culture or elaborate games of pretend. Most agree it was both, and neither, which makes perfect sense for a place like this. Time drips by. You hold your position. The pineapple sits warm in your hands, soaking up sun, absorbing the stares of 100 eyes, trying to find something sacred in spiked symmetry. And then movement. A sudden gust of wind lifts a bit of curtain. A small bird lands on a decorative fig. A nobleman points to your basket and says, "It reminds me of my mother." You suppress a smirk. You are the spirit of cultivation. You do not break character. Eventually the bell chimes. The crowd disperses gently. You are allowed to move. Your fingers are stiff. Your arms ache, but your heart is light. You walk the pineapple back to the garden chamber, set it on a simple table, and sit beside it. Just the two of you. No music, no metaphors, just the sound of bees in the lavender and your own steady breath. One servant passes and nods. Strong tableau today. Very seedy. You chuckle softly. After a while, you stroll back to the orangery, not for duty, but for comfort. The rows of leafy, well-tended plants offer a peace you've grown fond of. You check on the newer pineapple shoots, tiny green crowns poking from terracotta. So unremarkable now, so full of potential. The gardener waves. Another batch coming soon. Hope no one writes poetry about them. You hope so too. Evening brings a small supper beneath the plane trees. Just staff, just stories. No fans or lace or metaphorical melons. Someone plays a lute badly. Someone else insists their aunt once met a fig who changed her life. You eat in silence, smiling. After the meal, someone brings out a simple sliced pineapple, no garnish, no gold, no pedestal. Just fruit, cold and fresh. You take a bite. It's sharp, sweet, not spiritual, but good, just good. You sit back, juice on your fingertips, and look up at the sky. The first stars are appearing, soft, honest, unbothered. You feel the weight of weeks lift from your shoulders, replaced by something quieter, something close to peace. Because sometimes a performance ends not in applause, but in stillness. And sometimes that's even better. You wake late the next morning to the sound of gentle sweeping broom, bristles across stone, methodical and kind. A rhythm of maintenance, of things winding down. There's no summons today, no performance, no metaphor to embody. Just you. You drift slowly through the palace barefoot for once. The velvet halls feel softer that way, less performative, more like home. In the main salon, the pedestal that once held the pineapple stands empty. Not mourned, just available. A nobleman walks past and sets down a rolled-up paper fan. No ceremony, no applause. You pass the music chamber. A harpsichord plays quietly, but no one's listening. Not really, the sound just exists now, like wind through trees, beautiful and backgrounded. You arrive at the East Garden, where the Marquise de la Pomme sits on a stone bench fanning herself slowly, with what appears to be a fronde. She offers you a seat. "I'm retiring the Fruit Society," she says after a moment. "We've run out of metaphors. And jam." You nod. I suppose she continues. There's only so much adoration you can pour onto something before it starts to look like projection. You glance toward the orangery. She smiles. "But it was nice while it lasted, wasn't it?" You both sit in silence for a while. One mainstream fact. Like all obsessions at Versailles, the pineapple craze faded eventually. Other fruits emerged, other symbols rose. But nothing ever captured the palace's imagination in quite the same way. It became part of Versailles' lore, a chapter, not a legacy. Later that day, you find the artist Delandre in the portrait gallery, staring at one of his own paintings, the stylized, impossible pineapple with rays of light and cherubs. He looks tired, proud, a little sheepish. "I'm painting bees next," he says, less existential. You walk with him to the archives, where old sketches are being boxed and labeled. He lets you keep one, a rough charcoal drawing of you holding the pineapple on tableau day. You tuck it under your arm. One quirky detail. When the pineapple-themed era ended, many artifacts were quietly moved to storage, but not destroyed. They became part of the court's visual memory set, pieces for future nostalgia. Fruit, after all, spoils. But fruit stories do not. That evening, a quiet supper is held in the staff quarters. No themes, no symbolic dishes. just bread, roasted onions, a little pork. Someone opens a bottle of plum wine, and a footman reads aloud from a completely pineapple-free poem. It's refreshing. After dinner, you return to your quarters. The sketch rests on your table, your coat hangs neatly by the door, and on the sill, catching the light of the setting sun, sits a small ceramic pineapple gifted by the kitchen girls, they say, for emotional continuity. You hold it in your hands. It's heavier than it looks. You smile. Then you do what no one ever dared. You place it in your cupboard. Not as a relic, just as a memory. As night falls, you wander one last time through the outer gardens. The stars are early tonight, already brushing the sky with their calm presence. You hear laughter in the distance, then stillness, then the hush of Versailles breathing through its marble bones. You sit on your favorite bench. The wind smells like rosemary and turned earth. You close your eyes, and somewhere deep in the palace, maybe in a quiet crate, maybe only in thought, a pineapple sleeps no longer, polished, no longer displayed, but remembered. There's something final about this morning's light. It streams into the palace not with pomp or drama, but with that soft golden inevitability that signals a season's end. You rise slowly, dress without urgency, and leave your quarters with the quiet sense that today will ask nothing extravagant of you, and that will be more than enough. You walk through Versailles like a ghost of its own memory, unnoticed, unobtrusive. The halls are quieter, the decorations simpler. Even the footmen seem to move with less choreography, like actors in the last scene of a long play. You're summoned once gently this time to the greenhouse near the kitchen gardens. A new shipment of plants has arrived from Martinique. Not pineapples, just herbs, useful things. You help unbox them hands and soil knees and gravel. It feels honest. One mainstream fact. While pineapples were grown and admired for their beauty and rarity, the unsung work of Versailles gardens focused on practical plants, medicinal herbs, kitchen staples, crops that fed both palate and people. The glamour was upstairs, but the heartbeat of the palace pulsed in these quieter rows. The gardener asks if you'll stay a while. You do. You water seedlings. You repot a sickly basil sprig. You dust off a cracked nameplate that reads Coriandrum sativum and replant it in the ground like a small whispered promise. One quirky detail. Some gardeners reportedly named their favorite plants not for show, but for fun. There's record of a rosemary bush named Josephine, a melon vine called Monsieur Tendre, and a particularly robust strawberry patch nicknamed the Council of Juicy Elders. You smile at that. After your work, you walk the path that circles the pond near the orchard, once a prime spot for pineapple-themed poetry readings. Today, it's just ducks and the faint scent of something baking. You stop by the kitchen window. A scullery maid spots you and hands you a warm pastry. Something simple, folded faintly sweet. It's not pineapple, she says with a grin. But it's not inspired. You take a bite. Peach, mint, a whisper of citrus. You find yourself back in the tapestry gallery where the older works are kept, scenes of harvest markets and the occasional allegorical fruit garden. One depicts a figure that might be you, standing barefoot in a field, holding a single pineapple, like a lantern in fog. You laugh, just once. Later, you're called politely, almost apologetically, to help prepare a guest room. A distant cousin of someone minor is visiting, and the chamberlain insists on a fruit motif. You help arrange a modest still life, apples, plums, and a small ceramic pineapple from the storeroom. You tuck a lavender sprig beside it, for no reason at all. As the sun sets, the palace turns to shadow. The wind rustles through ivy and gently rattles the window panes. You walk one last circuit through the hall of mirrors, your reflection softer now, less costumed, more true. One mainstream fact, Versailles never stopped performing. Even as fashions changed, kings fell, and revolutions neared, the palace remained a stage. But not all performances were grand. Some were as quiet as a gardener humming over basil, or a servant polishing a plate they no longer feared to eat from. You find yourself back on your usual bench stone, warmed slightly by the day's last light. The ivy is in bloom now, and the bees have grown lazy. You hold the ceramic pineapple in your lap. No one is watching, so you speak to it, just once. Thank you. Not for its taste, not for its symbolism, but for being the improbable axis around which a moment of quiet, improbable beauty spun itself. You close your eyes, and the wind carries the scent of earth sugar and sleep. The day begins with a letter unusual in both origin and content. It's not from a noble, nor a cook, nor a poet. It's from a child. Scrawled in crooked ink and tied with blue string, the note reads, "I heard you were friends with the pineapple. Can I see where it used to live?" There's no name, just a wax seal in the shape of a smiling sun. You carry the note with you as you walk to the orangery, wondering who sent it. Inside, the rows of potted citrus glow softly in the morning light. The pineapple pedestals remain empty, wiped clean, but not erased. There's a sense of respectful pause here, like a theater just after the curtain has closed. You sit on one of the benches and look around. Eventually, a girl appears no older than 7, hair tied with garden twine, eyes full of questions. She doesn't introduce herself, just holds your gaze and says, "I brought a drawing." She hands it to you, a crayon pineapple riding a horse wearing a crown too big for its head. You nod solemnly, accurate. You take her on a tour, not the official one, not the polished practice script the docents recite. You take her through the real story. You show her where the pineapple once waited in a velvet-lined box before its public hours, where it was nearly dropped in the hallway, where it was whispered about toasted bathed and even painted as a saint. One mainstream fact: though pineapples were once reserved for nobles and royalty, they eventually came to represent something more democratized: curiosity, delight, even shared imagination. By the late 18th century, children's books began, including illustrations of pineapples not as unreachable luxury, but as part of the world to discover. The girl listens with the reverence of a very small historian. She asks good questions. Did it, like all the attention, did it ever want to just roll away? Do you think it knew it was just a fruit? You don't answer, you just smile. One quirky detail. In a forgotten ledger near the palace's children's schoolroom, someone once recorded a child's remark about a pineapple on display. It's like a hedgehog had a very good dream. The record was marked philosophical insight. Keep. You lead her to the courtyard, where the tableau vivant took place. The props are gone now, the vines trimmed back, but the memory lingers in the air like perfume on linen. She stands where you stood and lifts her arms. Now, I'm the spirit of the garden. You clap, she bows. Back in the servants' wing, you share a simple lunch stew, a heel of bread, an apple. She eats thoughtfully, then pulls from her pocket a single gold sequin. "I found it," she says. "It fell off something important. You should keep it." You accept it like a treasure. When she finally departs skipping down the hall, you feel a softness settle in your chest. The kind of calm that comes when something ends the right way, not with a bang, but with a gift. You wander toward the chapel, not for ritual, just for quiet. There in a small alcove, you see a new fresco being planned. An artist stands before a wall sketching figures. Not saints, not kings, just ordinary people tending plants, sharing fruit, laughing. At the center, a pineapple half peeled resting on a cutting board. The artist sees you watching. "We're repainting," she says. "Less heaven, more earth." You nod. Later, as dusk paints the palace in gold and shadow, you sit on your bench for one of the last times. You hold the child's drawing in your hands. You touch the single gold sequin in your pocket. You watch the windows flicker with candlelight, like stars trapped in stone. And you think of how many meanings were given to a single fruit, how many layers you peeled back without ever truly reaching the center, and how maybe that was the point. You lean your head back. Above, the sky shifts to lavender. Somewhere inside, a heart plays not for performance, but for practice. And you let it carry you into stillness. You wake earlier than usual. There's no knock, no summons, no fruit waiting for polish. Just a gentle hush outside your window, the kind that belongs to things ending or beginning. You rise slowly, wash your face with cool water, and dress in your simplest clothes. You don't need finery today. No one is watching, no one is judging, and no pineapples are performing. You make your way through the palace one last time, not to deliver, serve, or interpret, but simply to witness. The grand staircase is bathed in warm morning light. It smells faintly of wax of dust and the fading perfume of last night's guests. You nod to the guard stationed there. He nods back, expression soft. The salons are quiet now. A few servants sweep gently around the chairs. The harpist practices arpeggios in the empty music chamber, no longer on display. The pedestal in the hall of mirrors stands bare, catching sun and shadows reflecting only the day. You make your way to the outer gardens where the gardener waves you over. He presses a trowel into your hand and points to a patch of soil. "Help me put this one in the ground." The plant is small, humble. Pineapple not for display, but for growing. Yet you kneel, you plant. You press earth around green spiked leaves and feel something unspoken pass between you and the soil. You sit back, wipe your hands, breathe. One mainstream fact. Toward the end of the pineapple's reign at court, a few cuttings were quietly planted away from display gardens. Not for status, not for trade, just to see what might happen if the fruit was allowed to grow quietly unbothered by metaphor. You walk the length of the reflecting pool, watching sunlight ripple across the surface. At the far end, someone has placed a basket of ordinary fruit. Apples, figs, a single small pineapple perfectly ripe and already sliced. You take a piece. It's tender, not poetic, not divine, but good. One quirky detail. In one final court inventory, a footman scribbled a personal note beside a pineapple entry. Gone soft. Not spoiled, just ready. It was never removed, just quietly copied into the next logbook, as if to say some things don't end. They mature. You head back inside. The kitchens are in full swing, preparing lunch with the rhythm of the real. No pageantry, just butter, salt, and hungry people. You help slice bread, arrange herbs, and sneak a sliver of cheese from a tray. No one minds. Afterwards, you return to your quarters and gather your things. The child's drawing the crayon, crown the sketches, the single gold sequin. You place them all in a small pouch, not to display, but to keep. You walk one last time to your bench beneath the ivy arch. It is exactly as you left it. You sit. The sun is warm on your face. The breeze carries birdsong and baking bread. No metaphors follow, no rituals remain. There is nothing to perform, nothing to prove, just a moment. You close your eyes and let the past week spool through your mind every absurd parade, every whispered legend, every time you held a fruit and saw not just a symbol, but yourself. And slowly, gently, you drift into the wind down. The palace fades behind you, now its walls softening into distance, its music trailing into quiet memory. You breathe a little slower. The sun is lower in the sky, melting across the stones like butter on warm bread. Your hands rest loosely in your lap, the weight of ceremony replaced by stillness. Everything moves more slowly now, each leaf drifting in the breeze like a whispered goodbye. The pineapple is gone, but in its place is something gentler, a kind of understanding. That beauty doesn't have to be ornate, that stories don't always need applause, that some things grow best when no one's looking. You hear the low murmur of the fountain nearby. A steady hush, a lullaby in water. You imagine the soft green crown of a new pineapple rising from soil, not in a pot, not on a pedestal, but in a quiet corner of the garden, growing in peace. The bench beneath you is warm, your breath slows. Even the birds seem to sing more softly now. There's nothing left to do, nowhere to go, only this moment folding in on itself like a petal at dusk. Let the quiet hold you. Let the stillness find you. Let sleep come not all at once, but gently like a curtain drawing itself closed. You are not in Versailles anymore. You are in the calm between dreams. The fruit is at rest, and so are you. Sweet dreams.